Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Joe Hammer, President of Discussion Unlimited, and I welcome you to this old-fashioned town meeting tonight. Governor Brown last year, shortly after the assassination, in an address to the students of Occidental College, said, "There should be criticism and free debate in a free society. Let it be constructive. Let it be positive." He said, "The mourning period for the late president will never really end." It now falls to us, the students, the teachers, the political leaders, the citizens, to prove that from this tragedy we can emerge with a strengthened democracy. End of quote. The governor has in his statement described with unerring accuracy the aims and objectives of Discussion Unlimited. Discussion Unlimited is a non-profit educational corporation whose sole purpose is to present public forums on issues and subjects of vital and lively interest to the general public. Discussion Unlimited itself takes no stand on any issue. It prefers to present or create the controversy between those who hold varying and divergent opinions on any issue under discussion. We are certain that the participants here tonight are all men of intellect, integrity, and sincerity. The differences of opinion that will be presented here will be presented in a manner characteristic of men of these qualities. Knowing that audiences can be most partisan, we ask that you observe a few simple rules of courtesy. If you agree with what is being said, you may, if you wish, applaud to show your approval. If you disagree with what you hear, please show the speaker the courtesy of listening to what he has to say, no matter how much you may disagree. Radio station KPFK is taping this forum in its entirety and will be programmed for broadcasting in the very near future. Those of you who would like to have your names on our mailing list, please fill out the form in the brochure and pass it on to one of the ushers. Our publicity for this forum has been more extensive than any of our previous events. We have had such wide TV, radio, and newspaper coverage that we have had telephone calls from Sacramento, Long Beach, San Diego, Santa Barbara, and other cities within a 50 or more mile area. It is now my pleasant task to introduce the chairman and moderator of the evening. He is a Beverly Hills attorney, member of the New York and California bars, member of the board of the American Civil Liberties Union of the Southern California region, chairman of the censorship committee of the Southern California ACLU, who is the attorney of record in winning the Tropic of Cancer censorship case taken to the Supreme Court. It is my pleasure to present Mr. Nathan Schlenker.
Thank you, Mr. Hammer. Ladies and gentlemen, I must say first that when I was first invited to come here and moderate this meeting, I noted that my name was not on the brochures, and I said to one of the men that perhaps we can't get 500 people in. I see the audience is packing this room, and that the judgment of the chairman of the committee was right in keeping my name out. I want to make one observation about the conduct of the meeting itself. This may repeat what Mr. Hammer said, but Mr. Weirin, who is sitting to my left, the gentleman with a beard, and I are a long time from a high school. And he has devoted many years to the American Civil Liberties Union. And one theme that he has had is the right of speech and the right to hear and to listen. So please do not boo or hiss anyone. Listen to what they have to say and make your judgment. Now, the format of this meeting is basically this. Mr. Lane, who is an attorney from New York, the Eastern Establishment, has practiced civil and criminal law in that state for some 13 years. He was a member of the New York State Assembly, and he has been active in the case involving the investigation on the assassination of President Kennedy. He has been and he is vigorously critical of that report, of the Warren report. And he will make a presentation based upon his knowledge and his investigation, which will challenge and call into question the validity of the report. Mr. Joseph Ball, who is sitting at the extreme end from where I am, is an attorney well known in California by the community and by the bar, highly respected. He is a man who is the president of the state bar. He has been a senior counsel for the Warren Commission. He is a lawyer's lawyer, highly respected by knowledgeable lawyers in this community. He has worked on this report, and he is knowledgeable about it, and he will examine Mr. Lane with respect to this presentation. Sitting next to Mr. Ball is Herman Sullivan. Herman Sullivan, whom I have Herman Sullivan is a quiet, dignified man who is fire unleashed when he is in a courtroom. He is a magnificent lawyer, and the kind of a lawyer that everyone who is in the profession wants to be able to emulate and to reach. He will examine Mr. Lane with respect to his presentation for the purpose of determining how much of the criticism that is presented by Mr. Lane is valid and how much is not. Finally, in this catalog of talent, we come to Mr. Al Wirren. I hesitate to speak about him because I have a great love for him, and I hope this doesn't get out to Chief Parker. Mr. Wirren has devoted his life to the cause of American civil liberties. He has sometimes been criticized for the scope and the range of his interests, but he has had only one interest, and that has been to defend the Bill of Rights and to defend the right of expression without regard to whether that expression was wise or foolish, constructive or venal. It was the right to express an opinion which was always his concern, and I think knowledgeable people have always applauded him for that. Now, Mr. Lane will make the initial presentation. It is scheduled to run some 45 minutes. He may make it shorter, perhaps. And then the panel will examine him. There is some discussion and some question as to whether there are 3 men ranged against 1. I do not think that it ought to be considered in that light. The only thing we're concerned with here is to ascertain as much of the truth as is possible to ascertain in one night with all the cars jumbled outside as they are. Now, we are going to proceed at this point, and my function will be to moderate, to keep tempers down so that the fire of the discussion will not be extinguished, but that it should be possible to hear what is being said and to understand the content of the discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Lane.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think my time has begun already. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for you are the only jury, the American people, the only jury that Lee Harvey Oswald shot to death in the basement of an American courthouse in Dallas while handcuffed to law enforcement officials, the only jury that he will ever have. This is the document for which we have waited so long, which the Warren Commission has labored so long. It has been described by the New York Times as the most massive detective job in the history of the world. We were told that 25,000 separate interviews and re-interviews were conducted by agents of the FBI alone to produce this magnificent document. It is, we were told, unmatched in the annals of fact-finding. Now, when President Johnson received this massive document on a national television network not long ago, he made exactly the same point in a somewhat less sophisticated fashion. He held it in his hand and he said, "It's very heavy." As indeed it is. And history may record that comment as the finest short analysis of the Warren Commission report. We have found it difficult to discuss this question on the media. More than a year has passed since the death of our president. More than a year. But not one national radio or television network has presented a single program, not one network program in America, which in any respect challenged the conclusions of the government in this case. This is the only country in the world where that shameful condition exists. In no other country. Why, when we say that this commission report does not even accurately represent the testimony taken before the commission, the New York Post says that those who say it, Bertrand Russell and Mark Lane, are extremists. Well, I would remind them and the media of these words. We are not afraid to entrust the American people with unpleasing facts. For a nation that is afraid to let its people judge the truth and falsehood in an open market is a nation that is afraid of its people. John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And in that spirit, let us examine this document. Mr. Ball was quite upset backstage a little while ago when I said this on television, this document, the Warren Commission report, is a fraud from the first page to the last page. And I had never made that statement prior to the time that the 26 volumes upon which it is allegedly were released, and we had an opportunity to read some of the important testimony adduced for the commission. First, let's find out where the shots came from. This is a rough approximation, the blackboard, of the scene in Dallas. The medical statements by the physicians, not when they testified months later before the commission, when the establishment had taken its position, but the statements they made on radio, television, and to the press in the Parkland Memorial Hospital and thereafter were quite clear. Said Dr. Kemp Clark, the physician who pronounced the president dead, the bullet that entered the president's throat entered from the front and ranged downward into the chest and did not exit. Said Dr. Malcolm Perry, who performed the tracheotomy upon the president's throat, the wound in the throat clearly appeared to be an entrance wound. Said Dr. Robert N. McClelland, senior physician at the Parkland Memorial Hospital, I know enough about bullet wounds. He said, you know, down here in Dallas, we have a chance to treat bullet wounds every single day. And the wound in the president's throat was an entrance wound. We know the difference between entrance wounds and exit wounds. And so the government started to develop the case. starting with the basic premise that Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin, the lone assassin, that he fired the fatal shots from the 6th floor of the book depository building, and now with the only hard intelligence available, that the bullet entered the president's throat from the front. The first position taken by the FBI and the Dallas police was that the car was there on Houston Street approaching the book depository building when Oswald fired down, and said the New York Times, quoting the FBI, quoting the Dallas police, Oswald then swung his rifle in an arc of 180 degrees as the car moved left on Elm and fired down Elm Street, the second bullet striking the governor and the third striking the president, wounding him fatally. There was a problem with that story, in addition to the fact that it was totally untrue, and that is that every single witness to the scene, including Governor Connally, Jacqueline Kennedy, Mrs. Connally, and the films, showed that the car was there on Elm Street before the first shot was fired. Well, that then confronted the authorities with a rather important dilemma. How did Oswald shoot the president from the front, from the back? 13 days after, we're going to hear a lot about the autopsy tonight, I hope we will. 13 days after the autopsy was completed, it began at 8 p.m. at the Bethesda, Maryland hospital, and ended at 11 p.m. there. 13 days thereafter, when the FBI and the Secret Service reenacted the crime, they reenacted it, said the New York Times on December 6th, with the agent playing the role of the president in the reconstruction of the crime as he passed the book depository building, turning completely to the rear to expose his throat to the book depository building, trying to explain how the bullet entered from the front, although Oswald was allegedly behind the president when the shots were fired. But the films, which were published all over the world, showed the president looking to the front and slightly to the right when the first bullet entered his throat. And so the final story presented by the government through the Warren Commission report is that the wound in the throat has been transformed miraculously from an entrance wound into an exit wound. Well, the New York Times promised us on December 6th, when they raised the question of why the Secret Service agent was turning around to the rear when we know the president was looking to the front, said the New York Times, when the statement is released by the Marine Corps commander, Dr. Humes, who conducted the autopsy, when we see his papers, his preliminary notes, then we will know what the expert on the angle of entry has to say. And so we waited for the Warren Commission report to be released, and it came out, and there were no preliminary notes from Dr. Humes, the Marine Corps commander, who was the expert. But then the 26 volumes came out, and we rushed to open up to this most important area to find out what those preliminary notes by Dr. Humes said, and I'll read it to you. Volume 17, Commission Exhibit 397, page 48, on the stationery of the United States Naval Medical School, National Naval Medical Center, Bethesda, Maryland, 24th of November, 1963, certificate. I, James J. Humes, certify that I have destroyed by burning certain preliminary draft notes related to the autopsy that he performed on President Kennedy. Well, he was questioned, Dr. Humes, before the commission. Now, surely we're going to find out why he burned those notes which did not belong to him, but belonged to the people of the United States. Perhaps he would volunteer the information. He did not. Well, perhaps one of the attorneys questioning, the inquisitive attorneys questioning for the Warren Commission, were going to ask him, and they did not. Never asked him why he burned the notes, and so that remains one of the dark secrets. There were some other very serious questions which the commission indicated that it was going to resolve, but unfortunately never did. There was a man by the name of Seymour Weitzman, an officer in Dallas, and he found the rifle on the 6th floor of the book depository building. Did Seymour Weitzman, and he described it in an affidavit as a Mauser, 7.65 millimeters, and all day long. From November 22nd until November 23rd, the Dallas District Attorney, Henry Wade, said, we have the assassination weapon, a German Mauser, 7.65 millimeters. Then on November 23rd, the Federal Bureau of Investigation issued its first public statement in the case. It was as follows. Oswald purchased a rifle, our records show, back in March of 1963. He purchased it from an advertisement which appeared in the February issue of the American Rifleman. It was, in fact, an Italian carbine, caliber 6.5, and then Mr. Wade, the Dallas district attorney, jumped in front of the first live television camera to pronounce that in that holy city of Dallas overnight a miracle had taken place. The rifle in their hands had been transformed. It changed both its nationality and its size. And it had become an Italian weapon, no longer German, a carbine, no longer Mauser, and caliber 6.5, no longer 7.65 millimeters. Read the Warren Commission report. They explained to you that the officer signed the affidavit. He didn't really look at it. He must be some kind of a boob who doesn't know anything about rifles. But then read Mr. Weitzman's testimony. Mr. Ball knows about it because he questioned him. He told Mr. Ball, volume 7, page 105, that he is a graduate engineer, that he worked or had a connection with a sporting goods shop, sold rifles, and is familiar with rifles. And while he was there, he had some other things to say as well. He was standing at Maine and Houston when the shots were fired. He ran up to that grassy knoll, climbed over that fence over there, and when he was behind that fence, the fence from which the shots were fired, at least some of the shots were fired, which came from the front, he met a railroad yardman, he said, page 109, volume 7. And he asked the yardman if he heard anything or saw anything. And the yardman said, he said, yes, sir. He pointed out the wall section where there was a bunch of shrubbery. And he said that's where he thought the noise of the shots came from, behind the wooden fence. And he said also after the shots were fired, quote, he thought he saw somebody throw something through the bush over there. Well, now we're going to find out who that railroad yardman is, his name, his description from Seymour Weitzman's notes, are we not? Bring him down before the commission and get his testimony. And what's the next question asked by Mr. Ball? I think that's all. Do you have any desire to read this over and sign it, or will you waive signature, Mr. Weitzman? I will waive signature, and that is the end of the testimony of Seymour Weitzman, the only witness to the murder of Patrolman Tippit, who is able to identify Lee Harvey Oswald as the person who fired the shots. The only one who actually saw the shots fired and could say, I saw Lee Harvey Oswald fire the shots, is a woman by the name of Helen Louise Markham. Mrs. Markham passed out on the scene shortly thereafter. After the shots were fired, she was taken to the Parkland Memorial Hospital in a state of hysterics and treated there. Thereafter, she was taken to the Dallas police station to view the lineup. We're told that Oswald was number 2 in the lineup. If you read the commission report, it seems that Oswald was the second man in the lineup, not all day long, but quite regularly. He was the second man in a 4-man lineup. And Mrs. Markham picked him out. She said, he's number 2. He's number 2, we're told. And now Mrs. Markham is going to be questioned. Again, we find Mr. Ball doing the questioning. Volume 3, page 310. This is the witness now to the murder of Officer Tippit. Now, when you went to the room, you looked these people over. These 4 men? Yes, sir. Did you recognize anyone in the lineup? No, sir. You did not? Did you see anybody? I've asked you that question before. Did you recognize anybody from their face? From their face, no. Did you identify anybody in these 4 people? I didn't know nobody. I know you didn't know anybody, but did anybody in that lineup look like anybody you had seen before? No. I had never seen none of them. None of these men. Not one of the 4. Not one of them. Not one of all 4. No, sir. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the magic question. Was there a number 2 man there? Mrs. Markham, number 2 is the one I picked. And shortly thereafter, the Ball asked Mrs. Markham if she recognized him from his appearance, and she said, I looked at him. When I saw this man, I wasn't sure. But I had cold chills run all over me. A rather mystic identification, I would suggest. What's the Warren Commission's conclusion? The Warren Commission concludes that Mrs. Markham, in terms of the probative value of her testimony identifying Lee Harvey Oswald, is, quote, a reliable witness. I called Mrs. Markham. I called her because I read in the newspapers which Mr. Ball disparages on television. He said, I went before the commission and brought him a lot of old newspapers, that's all. Said it's the Beverly Hills Bar Association. Yeah, the newspapers are a little bit more accurate about this case in many respects than the commission, because they were talking to the people before the story was in. And Mrs. Markham said to the Dallas police in the presence of Hugh Ainsworth, the Dallas Morning News reporter, and carried in a number of newspapers, the man she saw kill Tippit was short, he was stocky, he had bushy hair. Oh, the commission tries to give the impression that I made up that description somehow. But Mrs. Markham, of course, is not the only person who said that. We have an officer by the name of Sergeant Hill who testified before the commission. He was questioned by Mr. Bellin. He said he had heard on the Dallas radio that the person who shot Officer Tippit had brown, bushy hair, was 5'10", and about 160, 170 pounds. And then Sergeant Hill of the Dallas Police reported, Volume 7, he said further, when I reached the scene, an eyewitness walked up to me and gave me a description of the man, about 5'8", about 170 pounds, and he had brown, bushy hair. The commission likes to believe that I invented the idea of the bushy hair. This is long before I ever dreamed that I would have anything whatsoever to do with this matter. And so I called Mrs. Markham. I called her, and I talked with her. And I said, I'd like to talk with you. She said, oh, I can't talk with you. I've been ordered. I've been ordered by the FBI and by the Secret Service and by the Dallas police. I'm not allowed to talk with anyone. Well, we discussed the matter at great length. I told her that probably even down there in Dallas she heard the expression, this is a free country. That means that the police cannot tell anyone not to talk. Anyone who wants to speak can speak, and finally she did speak with me. And I asked her, Mr. Ball made much of the fact that I asked her leading questions. Of course I asked her leading questions. That is the function of defense counsel. You're supposed to ask leading questions. It is not the function of counsel questioning his own witness, however. Like, was there a number 2 man in there? And I did ask her leading questions. I said, was he short? And she said, he was short. He was short. I said, was he stocky? Was he a little on the heavy side? Not too heavy, but a little on the heavy side. Was his hair bushy? Just a little bit bushy, she said. A little bit bushy. So she confirmed, in essence, a portion, certainly, of her original statement to the press. You know Oswald's description? Medium height or a little taller, almost painfully thin, with thin light-colored hair which was receding. Not exactly the same description Mrs. Markham gave to the police, to the reporters, or even to me many weeks thereafter. Well, I went before the commission and told them what she had told me. And, of course, the commission called Mrs. Markham back, and she denied page after page after page that she had ever talked with me. She was questioned by Alan Dulles, a member of the distinguished panel, Warren Commission. She was questioned by Gerald Ford, congressman of Michigan, who has written an account in Life magazine, totally at a variance from the Warren Commission report. He's a member, a distinguished member of the panel of the Warren Commission, and questioned and questioned and questioned, and she said she never talked with me, never talked to anyone over the phone, never gave that description, etc. The commission called me back, and the Chief Justice, a very moderate man for whom I have the greatest of respect, came to the conclusion which he released publicly, that I have every reason to doubt the truthfulness of your statement, Mr. Lane. When was the last time a Chief Justice of the United States accused an attorney who testified before him of committing perjury? I asked the Chief Justice and the Commission to take my testimony and Mrs. Markham's testimony and submit it to the United States Attorney's Office for prosecution for perjury, and let a jury of my fellow citizens determine who was telling the truth. Of course, the Commission declined to do that. I was rather confident about that, because I have a tape recording of that conversation with Mrs. Markham. Do you think the Commission ever directed... I told the Commission I had the recording. Do you think the Commission ever directed me to give them the recording? There's a very serious question, since I did not have permission from Mrs. Markham to make the recording. Mr. Rankin asked me that. He said, did you have permission from Mrs. Markham to make the recording? Sounds like someone really dying to get his hands on the recording, doesn't it? I said, no, I did not have permission. If the commission directed me to give them the recording then, if they had directed me, and I wrote to Mr. Rankin, counsel for the commission, I wrote to the Chief Justice and I said, will you direct me to give you the recording? Then, if I was so directed, the crime is to make it without permission and to release it, to divulge it without permission. If there's a crime at all, there's a close question as to whether or not it is a crime. But to make it is not a crime, to divulge it is not a crime. The combination, the commission ordered me to give it to him, directed me, and I gave it to him, there would have been no crime. The commission, of course, never directed me to give them the recording. Chief Justice merely said he didn't believe I had it. I went back to my office and I pondered this problem. I don't want to be prosecuted. I don't want to go to jail. But I thought that there were issues here which transcend the personal consideration of any single human being. And I voluntarily mailed that tape recording to the Chief Justice and to counsel for the commission with a letter saying to the Chief Justice, solely this, not asking for an apology, of course not, saying, Mr. Chief Justice, you now have the recording. I ask that you merely send me a letter saying that you no longer have any reason to doubt the truthfulness of my testimony. That was on July 7th. I have not yet received an answer from the Chief Justice. Well, they called Mrs. Markham back before the commission, this reliable witness, and they asked her the questions, 15 questions, I believe, all over again. Did you ever talk to him, et cetera, et cetera? No, never did. Then they said, Mr. Liebler, who was questioning Mrs. Markham, page 500, volume 7, Mr. Liebler, said, I have to tell you the truth. Frankly, he said, we have a tape recording that purports to be a conversation between yourself and Mr. Lane. Unfortunately, he was unable to play the recording for her at that time in the morning because he did not have a tape recorder. I think I am really responsible for that. I just sent them the tape. I did not send them a tape recorder. But the full force of government went into action, and by that afternoon they secured a tape recorder. And they played the recording for Mrs. Markham, and she heard it. And here they started to play it, and then she interrupted at one point. Page 501. The first time she interrupted, Mr. Liebler said, let's stop the recorder. What do you mean to indicate by that? Quote, this man I have never talked with. This lady was never on the telephone. Ponder that one for a moment. This lady was never on the telephone. If that's her voice, she was on the telephone. If it's not her voice, how does she know? Well, in any event. This man that called me like I told you, he told me he was from the city hall, the police department of the city hall. Well, now, do you remember having this conversation with somebody? Yes, I do, but he told me he was from the police department of City Hall. The tape starts, Mrs. Markham, my name is Mr. Lane. And he had to get some information, a little more information from me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then Mr. Liebler said, do you remember specifically when the phone conversation took place, et cetera? Now, did he tell you it was from the police department? Yes, sir. And Mr. Liebler says, now on this tape recording right here, this man is asking you what the police did. She said, I know it. Mr. Liebler said, and he said, the police took you and your affidavit? And her answer was, that man, I have never talked to that man. I talked to a man that was supposed to have been from the police department of City Hall. Do you recognize this as the voice of the man you talked to? No, it is not. This is not the same voice? No. How do you explain the fact that the woman's voice on this tape recording is your voice? I never heard that. You never heard the man's voice before? And I never heard this lady's voice before. This is the first time. Do you have any doubt in your mind at all that the lady's voice on the tape recording now is your voice? It is my voice. But this man told me he was from the city police. And on and on and on, and finally, he told me he was from the police department, and this lady never talked to me. Which lady is that? On the tape. Which lady on the tape? It was a woman talking. The lady's voice that was talking on tape here? Yes. I thought that was your voice. Not at the first there. The commission concludes, in terms of the identification of Lee Harvey Oswald, Mrs. Markham is a reliable witness. Well, Mark Twain once said, "Whoso, clinging from a rope by his hands, severeth it above his hands, must fall, it being no defense to claim that the rest of the rope is sound." If the rifle is incapable of the performance the Commission claims that it gave, if it is incapable of that performance, then the case against Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone assassin must disappear, and I do not mean to imply by that the rest of the case is sound at all. Let's see if the Commission accepted the obvious challenge to test the weapon. What do you do? Oswald was a Marine. He had some Marine Corps training with a rifle. Get 100 Marines, put them up on the 6th floor of the book depository building, give them the rifle with 3 shells in it. Let's drive a radio-controlled car past the book depository building, see if one of them can hit a sandbag in the back seat 2 times out of the 3 shots in a period of roughly 6 seconds, the period of time the Commission alleges was utilized by Oswald. If 1 out of 100, conceding they're all better shots than Oswald, 1 out of 100 can do it, we will concede it proves a rifle could do it. But it could not be done in that fashion, and that's why the Commission would not test it in that fashion. The world's greatest rifle shot could not secure from that weapon the performance which the Commission says was secured by Lee Harvey Oswald. That statement was made by the world's greatest rifle shot, Hubert Hamrer, the world's rifle Olympic champion, freestyle. He said, in my hands it could not be done. That's all I can tell you. Well, they decided they're going to test the weapon. And how are they going to test it? First, we have to see if we can escalate Oswald's ability with a weapon. So we bring forward Major Anderson, page 192 of the Warren Commission report, as compared to a civilian who had not received this intensive training. That's Oswald's basic training some years ago in the Marine Corps. He, Oswald, would be considered as a good to excellent shot. Sure, compare him to someone who never held a rifle in his hands. Of course he's a good to excellent shot. Compare a 9-year-old boy who plays sandlot baseball with my grandmother, and he's an excellent baseball player. But compare him with anyone in the major leagues, and he probably would not do so well. Let's compare Oswald to those who've gone through the armed services in the last 20 years. The second time he fired for score, he fired twice for score in the Marine Corps. The first time he did a little better. The second time he didn't do as well. The second and last time he fired 1 point above the minimum qualifying score designated by the Marine Corps as, quote, a rather poor shot. Despite the Commission's efforts to escalate Oswald's ability after his death, he remained at his death a rather poor shot. Now we're going to see how the weapon is tested. Page 193 of the report. Quote, excuse me, gentlemen. In an effort to test the rifle under conditions which simulated those which prevailed during the assassination, the Infantry Weapons Evaluation Branch of the Ballistics Research Laboratory had expert riflemen, etc., etc. They chose 3 riflemen, all listed, certified as master riflemen by the National Rifle Association, the highest qualification of rifle expertise on an international level. Those are the 3 gentlemen who are going to test the weapon to see if a man who was a rather poor shot, according to the Marine Corps records when last he fired for score, was capable. That's the first effort, to simulate the same conditions. Secondly, you can't get this from the report. You have to read the documents, but read the testimony of the gentleman who conducted the test, Mr. Simmons, and you will see that they fired from a tower 30 feet above the ground, and the experts were all given a stool to sit on, and they were all given a 2x4 wooden armrest to rest their rifle on. Oswald didn't fire where the Commission alleges 30 feet above the ground, but from a book depository window 54 feet above the ground. And he didn't have anything to sit on. He was either kneeling or sitting on the floor. And he had a little, we're told, according to the Commission story, he had a little cardboard box to rest his rifle on. But most important of all, Oswald allegedly was firing at a moving target. 3 times he fired, and at least twice he hit. Possibly 3 times he hit, but at least twice. These gentlemen fired at 3 still targets. 3 still targets. You know the difference between firing at a moving target and a still target through a telescopic sight? You have to totally reorient yourself and try to catch that moving car. The Commission said it wasn't really moving horizontally, it was moving somewhat away. So well, then why didn't they have their experts fire at something which was moving just somewhat away and not horizontal to them? 3 still targets. Take a look at the picture of the targets. Considerably larger than that portion of the human body which would be visible from the book depository building of someone sitting up against the back seat as the president did of the limousine. Almost twice as large was the target. And in addition to this, 3 stationary targets larger than the one Oswald allegedly had. 3 of the best rifle shots in America. And, quote, 193 of the commission report, quote, the marksmen took as much time as they wanted for the first target. As much time as they wanted. But read the commission report. What does it say? The presidential limousine was behind a tree and could not be seen from the 6th floor of the book depository building. And when the shot was fired that struck the president, according to the frames of the films taken by an amateur photographer, the commission concludes that it was within 0.8 of 1 second from the time that it emerged from the trees. So Oswald had, at the most, 0.8 of a second to fire that first shot. And how about 3 of the best rifle shots in America? The marksmen took as much time as they wanted for the first target, and they hit 6 out of 6. Each fired 2 rounds. How about the next one? They just had to move the rifle a little bit, not at a moving target. Unfortunately, the man who conducted the test complained that they couldn't really get the targets spread out the way they should because, unfortunately, they picked a rather inconvenient rifle range and they didn't have room to move the targets out. But they did the best they could under the circumstance. And these experts fired then a total of 12 shots, having to move their rifle but fire at still targets. They hit 7 times after they fired at the first one, which they had all the time they wanted. The next 2, they hit 7 and they missed 5. 3 of the best rifle shots in America. Hit 7, missed 5. Still targets, larger than the one Oswald allegedly fired at. And this poor shot, the commission says, this test proves that he could have used the weapon in that fashion. If that is not fraud, if that is not a fraud perpetrated upon the American people, in indicating that that test was in any way comparable to the conditions which existed allegedly on November 22nd, then I do not know the meaning of the word. Why was Oswald's description sent out in the first place? Well, that's not difficult to find out, is it? It was sent out by the Dallas police. All you have to do is ask them. 144 of the commission report, the commission concedes it is unable to find the basis on which Oswald's description was sent out. They are willing to hazard a guess. I will say that for the commission. They have courage in that area. There are scores of apparentlys, dozens of likelys, tens of possiblys, many, many probablys, and that area of speculation reserved by the Commission for the most important area of speculation, awarded the highest level, is a most probably. This is a most probably. Page 144. A man named Howard Brennan, says the Commission, was seated there across the street from the book depository building, leaning on a concrete facade, 107 feet from the base of the book depository building, says the Commission. He glanced up after the second shot was fired, and there he saw a man standing, firing at the president. And that man was 5 feet 10 inches tall, 165 pounds, white and slender, he said. Most probably. And so the Dallas police, most probably because Brennan told them to, sent out that description at 12:45 p.m. But the window was half closed. So if Oswald was standing up there firing, he was firing through the glass. And of all the miracles that took place in Dallas that day, this one of firing through a pane of glass and leaving it unmarked would have been the most remarkable one. So the Commission removed that one by saying Oswald was not standing. Most probably he was either sitting or kneeling. Quote 144 of the Commission report. Although Oswald testified that the man in the window, although Brennan testified that the man in the window was standing when he fired the shots, most probably he was either sitting or kneeling. There we have it. There's Mr. Brennan down there. He glances up. He sees a man at the window. He's 107 feet from the base of the building. He looks up. 6 stories high, 54, 55 feet high. The sun is shining on the window, and he sees a man who he swears is standing at the window. He's wrong. The man was actually sitting or kneeling, but nevertheless, thinking he was standing, he was able to give an almost absolutely accurate description of the man, not only his weight, his build, his color, but his height as well. Does the commission deal with that? Of course they do, in one pithy sentence, page 145, quote, Brennan could have seen enough of the body of a kneeling or squatting person to estimate his height. Well, during the evening of November 22nd, Brennan, after seeing television shots of Oswald, seeing that he's arrested, is brought down to the Dallas police station to see if he can pick out Oswald. Now, we know something about those lineups because Mr. Whaley, who was a Dallas taxi driver, told us in his testimony, oh, yes, I saw that lineup. He said, I could have picked Oswald out of that lineup with my eyes closed. With your eyes closed, how? Well, he said, there he was, handcuffed, and there were 5 young teenagers in the lineup. 5 young teenagers in Oswald. He said, I could have picked him out with my eyes closed because there he was saying, you call this a fair lineup? This is not a fair lineup. Well, they brought Brennan down to the lineup, and he was unable to make a positive identification of Oswald, says the commission on page 145, even under those circumstances, even after seeing him on television. And he testified that whether or not his seeing Oswald's picture on television affected his identification is something I don't know, but in any event, he could not pick him out positively as the one who did the firing. But he was questioned by the FBI and by the Dallas police, and on December 17th, says the commission, Brennan then stated he was sure the person who fired was Lee Harvey Oswald. But unfortunately, he slipped back a little bit because on January 7th, he told the FBI he was no longer sure that the man who fired. Now the commission goes on to say that because of this, the commission does not base its conclusion concerning the identity of the assassin of Brennan's subsequent identification of Oswald as the man he saw fire the rifle. There's a disclaimer following that. But now let us turn to page 250 where they start summing. That was page 145. We go 105 pages more. I don't know who wrote this section of the report, but evidently not the same person who wrote page 145. One witness, Howard L. Brennan, made a positive identification of Oswald as being the person at the window, is the commission's conclusion, 105 pages thereafter. Perhaps one of the great mysteries of the case is how it is possible that Oswald carried the alleged murder weapon into the book depository building being unnoticed. Well, the commission is going to explain that all to us, and they do. He carried it in a brown paper package. In fact, here are the 2 headlines. You know that it was said that his defense was that he had curtain rods when he talked to Wesley Frazier, but the commission knows he didn't have curtain rods, and here are the 2 chapter headings. They could be used as an alternative title for an Agatha Christie murder: The Curtain Rod Story or The Long and Bulky Package. The 2 headlines. First, the curtain rod story. Oswald told Frazier, the man who drove him from Dallas to Irving and then back the day of the assassination from Irving to Dallas. He said to him, I'm going to get some curtain rods, going back to get some curtain rods, said Mr. Frazier. And then Friday morning, Oswald pulled on Wesley Frazier, knocked on the door, and there was Frazier's sister, Mrs. Randall, and she saw Oswald with the package, saw him put it in the car, and Oswald then saw Frazier, and Frazier said, what do you got there, Lee? According to his testimony, Oswald said, I have curtain rods. I told you I was going to get curtain rods. The commission reprinted the whole thing in the report except the 2 words, because that implied that there was knowledge on the part of Frazier. So when they reprinted it from the testimony, they just left out the words, but printed the rest of that testimony. Just a small portion. The commission's artistic use of asterisks. Well, Oswald then entered the book depository building. The commission has 3 witnesses solely in connection to the curtain rod story or the long and bulky package story. One saw Oswald enter the book depository building. Only one person saw him enter the building, that day who has no testimony to offer in reference to the package. That one who saw him go in is Jack Doherty, in addition to the one who has testimony to offer regarding the package, Wesley Frazier, and the other, Mrs. Randall, who saw Oswald with the package. Let's first see what the Commission says in summarizing the testimony, the one-sentence testimony of the person who saw Oswald enter the building. Rather vague summation, I think you'll agree. Quote, 133, one employee, Jack Doherty, believed that he saw Oswald coming to work, but does not remember that Oswald had anything in his hands as he entered the door. Thank you. Now let's see if that vague testimony reflects the actual questioning and answers conducted by Mr. Ball of Mr. Doherty. Volume 6, page 376. Did you see Oswald come to work that morning? Yes, when he first came into the door. Did he come in with anybody? No. He was alone? Yes, he was alone. Do you recall him having anything in his hands? Well, I didn't see anything if he did. Did you pay enough attention to him, you think, that you would remember whether he did or didn't? Well, I believe I can. Yes, sir, I will put it this way. I did not see anything in his hands at the time. Mr. Ball, in other words, your memory is definite on that, is it? Mr. Doherty, yes, sir. In other words, you would say positively he had nothing in his hands. I would say that. Yes, sir. The Commission's summation, one employee, Jack Doherty, believed he saw Oswald coming to work, but does not remember that Oswald had anything in his hands. Now there are two persons who saw Oswald with the package. One is Mrs. Randall. She goes before the Commission. Now the Commission was anxious to take the brown paper package, which we're told was found there, the floor of the book depository building on November 22nd, of course, and they would like to show it to the witness. They want to disassemble the rifle and put it in the brown paper package, but alas, that brown paper package has been destroyed in terms of its value as evidence by the FBI, unfortunately. When they tested the package at the laboratory, they discolored it and destroyed it as evidence, and so the Commission was able to find an agency of government which was kind enough to make a new brown paper package, as they explained in their testimony, and the new fabricated package was utilized, and they took the rifle and broke it down, and they put it in the newly constructed package, showing them also the old discolored one, which was worthless, though, in terms of identifying it as the one which Oswald did or did not carry, because it had been so discolored, as the Commission attorney said to the witnesses. They showed it to Mrs. Randall, and she said no. He did not carry that package. He carried a shorter package. Then they showed it to Wesley Frazier thereafter, and Frazier said no, it was shorter than that. It was only 2 feet long. In fact, Frazier signed an affidavit on November 22nd, a copy of which we have, and that affidavit said that the package was 2 feet long. And he said, I saw Oswald, I was next to him in the car, he picked up the package, he put it under his arm, and he walked into the book depository building. And he said, I was watching some trains being coupled, so I walked in about 50 feet behind him. But when I saw him from the back, the package was not even visible as he held it under his arm. And so counsel for the Commission said, Mr. Frazier, pick up the package and show us how Oswald held it. And Mr. Frazier said he could not, it was too big. But they said, try, and so he tried. He picked up the package, he cupped it in the bottom of his right hand, he tried to get it in his armpit and hold it there, but it went up to his ear. So he said, no, couldn't be. Frazier is 6 feet, a little over 6 feet tall, he testified. Oswald was 5 feet 9 or 5 feet 10. I think one can conclude, although I don't like to move into the area of speculation or conjecture, since the Warren Commission has preempted that entire field. I think it is a safe assumption, knowing the measurements of the two gentlemen involved, to presume that if Frazier could not do it, it would be no easier for the shorter man, Oswald, to carry it that way. Well, the Commission has a conclusion it would like to reach. First, they do this in this fashion. First, they take this testimony of Mrs. Randall. They want to convert this package, which was so small that it could not be seen when he carried it, into a big rifle, bulky and large. And so they quote Mrs. Randall, quote, he carried a, inner quote now, Mrs. Randall, heavy brown bag close quote. He carried a heavy brown bag. But did Mrs. Randall say that? Get the subtlety here. Just shows you even in insignificant matters the commission is very disingenuous. This is Mrs. Randall's testimony. He was carrying a package in a sort of heavy brown bag. Not a heavy brown bag, in a sort of heavy brown bag. Heavier than a grocery bag. And later on she said, yes, it was a heavy type of wrapping paper. Not the package was heavy, the paper was heavy. But the commission converts that to he carried a heavy brown bag. And from the insignificant areas to the major areas, the commission indulges in deception. One moment more. Just one last point. I want to tell you how the commission sums up this area, page 134. Commission concludes that Oswald carried the bag containing the assassination weapon into the book depository building, and that Frazier and Randall are both mistaken as to the length of the bag. Frazier could easily have been mistaken when he stated that Oswald held the bottom of the bag cupped in his hands with the upper end tucked into his armpit. I just want to conclude on this note. When I first became involved in this matter, it was just as an attorney writing an article, taking the same position that Mr. Weirin's American Civil Liberties Union took, and that is that had Oswald lived, he could not have received a fair trial anywhere in America because of the massive publication of the charges against him released unethically by the FBI, the Secret Service, and the Dallas police. That was the only reason I wrote an article. The only reason I wrote an article, but then when I started to mass the information which was available, it seemed clear that there were questions which were unanswered, and the article said that as well. It was read by a lady in Hominy, Oklahoma. Didn't even know there was a Hominy, Oklahoma. And she sent it to Mrs. Oswald, and Mrs. Oswald called me, and I became involved and became more and more enmeshed. Had I known at the outset, when I wrote that article, that I was going to be so involved that I would close my law practice, abandon my work, abandon my political career, be attacked by the very newspapers in New York City, which used to hail my election to the state legislature. Had I known that, had I known that I was going to be placed in the lookout book so that when I come back into the country, I'm stopped by the immigration authorities only in America, but in no other country of the world, that my phones would be tapped, that not only would the FBI follow me around at lecture engagements, but present to the Warren Commission extracts of what I said at various lectures. I am not sure if I knew all that I ever would have written that article in the first place, but I assure you of this, having come this far, and now knowing what is at stake, when the establishment seeks to suppress the facts, and knowing what is at stake in this country in reference to this case, no matter what the difficulties, no matter what the obstacles, and no matter what the liberal establishment says or any other establishment says, we're going to remain with this matter until such time as the American people secure that to which we are all entitled in a free, open, and democratic society, and that is some intelligible answers to the thus far unanswered questions of Dallas on November 22nd. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, 45 minutes have passed very rapidly. We now have the second portion of this program. The examination of the presentation made by Mr. Lane will be conducted by the three attorneys sitting at the left. Mr. Ball will go first, and then Mr. Sullivan will go first. He will not be limited to one question. He can pursue a line of inquiry at a time that I think that he has had a fair chance to examine. I will ask him to stop for the time and let another man go on. The panelists will have the privilege, if they want to make a preliminary observation before they direct a question, to do so. The panelists and Mr. Lane will observe any ruling which I will make on the time and the response of the inquiry, so that a man may ask his question or make his observation without any interruption. And now is the time for you to test your own liberality, which is to listen attentively to views which perhaps you may disagree with, so that perhaps you may be persuaded one way or the other. Mr. Herman Selvin.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lane, and ladies and gentlemen. Well, I tried to tell him this was a dead mic, but I was assured it wasn't. But it is.
Sabotage.
Changing the format so far as I am concerned a little bit. I have a very brief preliminary statement, just a couple of sentences. I will ask Mr. Lane some questions in order to bring out, if possible, without shouting or demagoguery, his position on the facts, and then I shall make a statement of my own with respect to the facts relating to the direction from which the shots came. My preliminary statement is a very simple one. It comes to me as considerable of a shock to hear one who apparently is proud, and justifiably proud, of his activities in behalf of the American Civil Liberties Union to be echoing and parroting the accusations against the Chief Justice of the United States that are made by those who finance and post the impeach Earl Warren signs. My other observation is that it comes as nothing new to lawyers who have had some trial experience, notwithstanding that they themselves may not stoop to such tactics. It comes as nothing new to see a point made by taking a few bits of evidence here and there out of context, emphasizing, disregarding everything else in the record. There are some 24 volumes, I think, of testimony that was taken by the Warren Commission. You've heard a few snatches here and there from volume 14, was it? And maybe one other volume. I am reminded, and this will come as no news to the lawyers either, of the advice that one perhaps not too scrupulous lawyer once gave to a young lawyer just starting his career. He said, son, when the law and the facts are against you, when the law is against you, argue the facts. When the facts are against you, argue the law. When the law and the facts are against you, abuse the other attorney. The Warren Commission in this case is Mr. Lane's other attorney. He had practically nothing to say except to accuse the Warren Commission of fraud, of deliberate suppression of evidence, and why, for what purpose, and for what motive. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Lane just a few questions that, as I say, perhaps to set the scene. I may state, and I think it's correct, is it not, Mr. Lane, the diagram that is on this blackboard was one that you prepared.
That is correct.
And it purports to represent the streets and the general location of the building and the car at the time of the assassination of President Kennedy, is that right?
My field is not one of art. It's the best I could do, yes. I think it's rather
well,
close.
It at least gives us the idea. Now let me ask you one question to start with. Do you admit that in Dallas, Texas, on the 22nd of November in 1963, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, then President of the United States, was shot and killed?
I would like to have a serious debate, Mr. Selvin. I
Well,
hope you can get to that shortly.
You do admit that he was shot?
Because Mr. Selvin, when you will not argue the facts, and you will not argue the evidence, you will not accuse the other side, you will tell anecdotes. Let's get down to the facts.
Well, very well. I'm glad to have your admission that up to this point there hasn't been any argument. Is it your position that Lee Harvey Oswald did not shoot President Kennedy?
I take this position, Mr. Selvin.
Well, that question will be answered yes or no.
Just a second. Ladies and gentlemen, just a second, please.
Basic presumption, which all of us over the period of years took an oath to uphold, and that is that a man is presumed to be innocent until such evidence has been amassed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he is guilty. Utilizing that yardstick, which some of the country has forgotten, but not all of it, fortunately. Utilizing that yardstick, I say that the commission, by amassing not 24 volumes of testimony, sir, 15 volumes of testimony and 11 volumes of exhibits for a total of 26 volumes, by amassing that information, has not presented sufficient evidence which would prove that Lee Harvey Oswald was in any way associated in the assassination of the president.
Is it your position, Mr. Lane, that no shots came from the Texas Book Depository building at the time or about the time that the president was killed?
I don't know whether or not any shots came from there.
I'm asking for your position.
I told you I leave the area of speculation to the commission and those who wish to support the report. Right. So far as I'm concerned, I'll deal with facts. Good. We know that the vast majority of the witnesses present there, as you very well know, the vast majority of the witnesses of the assassination were never even called before the Warren Commission. But even those who were called before the commission and others who were there agree that shots were fired from behind the wooden fence. There was a concentration of Dallas police officers, FBI agents, and Secret Service agents behind the fence. Two of them reported that they smelled gunpowder back there. One person told the commission, a railroad employee, that he was standing on the overpass and that he saw smoke, wisps of smoke come up from behind the fence. Another man took the same position, although he was standing closer to the book depository building. There are those who said that they saw a man with a rifle in the book depository building. But the majority of those in the scene felt that the shots they heard came from the area high on the grassy knoll. Now, is it possible that someone firing with a silencer on the weapon fired from the book depository building or from that other building behind the limousine, which is the Dallas Sheriff's Office? Of course it is possible.
Where is the fence to which you refer on your diagram?
I beg your pardon?
Where is the fence to which you refer on your diagram? I'm just trying to locate it.
With the same area, you've read the testimony, where all the witnesses claim they congregated, right? That yellow line with the two trees and the bushes over there.
That's the fence about which you were talking.
Yes, and that connects with that ornamental concrete facade, which is represented by a semicircle.
Now that fence is how long from the overpass going?
It runs
east?
right into the overpass.
Yes, but from the overpass going east, how long is it?
Oh, I would estimate probably about 20 yards.
60 feet.
Maybe a little less.
What's the distance from the corner of Elm Street and Houston to the overpass?
I beg your pardon?
What's the distance from the intersection of Houston and Elm to the overpass?
I don't know exactly the distance.
Approximately.
I don't know. You probably know those distances as well as I do. You've studied the report. I have no idea.
No.
Let's discuss the charges.
Yeah, I notice you have two shaded squares, one on Houston and one on Elm Street on your diagram. What do they represent?
The first representation by the Dallas police was that they both represent the limousine. The first story told by the Dallas police that the car was there on Houston Street approaching the book depository building when the first shot was fired by Oswald, which totally confirmed the medical testimony that the bullet entered from the front, ranged downward into the president's chest, and did not exit. The second one represents the final position taken by the government as to where the car actually was when the shots were fired.
Now, do you have any position or opinion that the car was anywhere else at the time the shots were fired than where you've shown it on Elm Street?
It was in three different positions during the time that 3 shots or more were fired, and so that is approximately the position which represents a median, I would say.
At what speed was it traveling, do you know?
I beg your pardon?
At what speed was it traveling?
I don't know. I can tell you what the commission says.
From 11 to 20 miles, depending upon where it was.
I beg your pardon?
From 11 to 20 miles an hour, depending on where it was?
That's the position taken by the commission, yes.
All right. Well, now, do you have any information to the contrary?
Well, we know this, that many witnesses testified before the commission, and many others who were not permitted to testify before the commission stated that after the first shot was fired, the driver slowed the car down almost to a complete stop and then speeded it up again. So one would conclude that although the car probably was traveling, as the commission says, from 11 to 20 miles an hour, during most of the time it came almost to a sudden stop and started quickly after the first shot was fired.
How far is the fence from Elm Street?
I don't know exactly. I've been there several times, but I didn't measure it.
Well, do you have any estimate?
It's a little closer to where the limousine was when the first shot was fired than is the book depository building, which means that the book depository building, according to the commission, was 177 feet from the limousine when the first shot was fired. The fence would be a little closer.
Well, would you say the fence was, what, 100 and how many feet?
I don't know. I would say closer than 177.
Close to 177
Closer
feet.
than 177.
You have any idea at a distance of 177 feet? Well, let me start with another question first. The interval between the first and the last shots was what, did you say, 5 seconds?
No, I didn't say. I said the commission takes the position that it's roughly 6 seconds, depending upon a number of formulas which the commission becomes involved in. This is the way the commission works
Well,
out. It's roughly 5.5 to 6 seconds. However, the commission says that it could be 2.3 seconds more, possibly.
Well, assuming that it's 6 seconds, at a speed of 11 miles an hour, the car in 6 seconds would travel 96 feet, wouldn't it, about?
I don't know. I'm not a mathematician. It may be about that, yes.
Well, it takes a little, very simple arithmetic to figure it out, but anyway. At a speed of 20 miles an hour, it would have traveled in 6 seconds. It would have traveled, roughly 180 feet.
I'll take your word for it, sir. You seem to know
Right.
this.
Now, do you have any idea? Do you have any idea of how much at a distance of 177 feet, how much change, lateral change, would have to be made in the barrel of a rifle in order to produce a horizontal change in the trajectory at a distance of 177 feet of 60 feet or 96 feet or 180 feet?
I don't understand your question.
Well,
What's the question?
If I'm shooting over there
Yes.
and I move the gun this much, say I move it 6 inches,
Yeah.
100 feet away from the gun, that bullet's going to land more than 6 inches away from my first point of aim, isn't it?
Yes.
All right, now I'm asking you if you have any idea, in order to move that bullet from the first point of aim, a distance of 96 feet, let us say, how far do you have to move the barrel?
I have no
of that gun?
idea. What's the point?
What's the point?
Yes.
Well, it seems if it only has to move a little bit, it's a relatively simple matter for anyone who's fired a gun anywhere other than the Coney Island shooting gallery. It's a very simple matter to keep that gun trained on the target.
Oh, sir,
you
you're
only have
not-
to move the gun a few inches.
Sir, you're not seriously saying that with an Italian carbine which roars like a cannon and has a kick like a mule that he kept his eye to the telescopic sight, fired, and then kept his eye running during the firing. You're certainly not saying that. Or even the master rifleman didn't do that when they tried it for the
Let me
Warren
say
Commission.
something. That is a mistake. That is a misstatement of fact. The remark just made about the Italian carbine with a kick like a mule and a roar at the muzzle, that is a misstatement of fact.
How much in comparison?
It is a bolt-action weapon, so after you fire, you have to bring it down, pull the bolt back.
Mr.
The experts
Lane.
testified the bolt worked very hard. Is that not true?
Mr. Lane, in comparison to a 22 caliber, how large is a 6.5
Larger.
carbine? What?
Larger.
How much larger?
I don't know exactly the size.
Well,
It's smaller
it's
than a
approximately
30.
a
It's
third
smaller
of
than
a-
a 30 caliber. It's larger than a 22. It's in between.
So probably about 25 caliber, is that right?
That's about in between. Yeah.
Well, about the same kind of gun you find in a shooting gallery that teenagers and even quality teenagers shoot. From the standpoint of the caliber of the bullets, is that right?
Did a lot of damage, didn't it?
All right, now let me ask you something. Do you know of any cartridge cases? Well, let me ask you, do you know how many shots were fired? Or do you have any opinion as to how many shots were fired based on the evidence that you have read or that you've been told about?
You can ask me continually about my opinion, but I'm sorry that I cannot give it to you. I can only tell you the facts that we've been able to ascertain.
All right, well then you tell me the facts that
Yes.
you've been able to ascertain.
There is
How many shots
testimony-
were fired?
There is testimony before the commission by a number of persons that 3 shots were fired.
All right.
There is testimony before the commission by some persons that 4 shots were fired. There is testimony before the commission by some persons, including Mrs. Jean Hill, the Dallas public school teacher, that between 4 and 6 shots were fired. She said she was certain of that, although she was told by the FBI and by the Secret Service. She said that she must change her story and only say 3 because they had 3 shells and 3 wounds, so they were only saying 3 shots.
All right, now, were any shell, well, It is true with the carbine. You've seen this carbine, I suppose.
Yes, I've had it in
You're
my
familiar
hands.
with the way it operates.
Yes, it's a bolt-action
Well, now,
weapon.
in order to inject a live cartridge into the chamber for purpose of firing, a spent cartridge that might have been there from the shot before must be ejected. Isn't that right?
If there was a spent cartridge
Yeah,
there
all
in
right.
the
Well, now,
chamber,
if
it would
you're-
have to be ejected, of
If
course.
you're firing 3 shots in succession, why then the first 2, spent cartridges from the first 2 shots would have to be ejected, would they not? In order.
Yes.
Were there any cartridges found anywhere near or around that fence, so far as you know? Any spent
By the-
cartridge cases?
Did the Dallas police find any cartridges there? I don't
Did
know,
anybody?
sir. I don't
Anybody?
know. It's one thing to ask people to have faith in the wiring commission, but to ask us to have faith in the Dallas police, I think you're asking too much.
Well, there are 200 people over there.
You know if any people, at the time of the cavalcade, if any people or spectators were standing near that fence?
There was no one behind it except possibly those who
Not
were firing
behind
weapons.
it, in front of the fence, between Elm Street
Oh
and the
yes,
fence.
of course. There were 5 people there. I'll tell you who they were. Abraham Zabruder, who's the amateur photographer who took the pictures which appeared in Life magazine. He testified before the commission. The shots came from behind me, from behind the fence. 4 employees of the Dallas Morning News. One, Mary Woodward, who wrote an article published as a feature article on page 3 of the Dallas Morning News, November 23rd. She said I was there with 3 colleagues. She gave their names, and she said we heard the shots. It was a horrible, ear-shattering noise, a roar, and they all came from behind us and from our right, slightly to our right behind the wooden fence. But of course the Warren Commission, although this eyewitness account was published in the Dallas Morning News with the names of all 4 witnesses, the Warren Commission, of course, never called any.
Were there any other people near that fence? Were there any spectators? How many spectators were there along Elm Street between Houston and the overpass, do you know, at the time of the cavalcade?
Between Houston and the overpass
on Elm Street.
In the
yeah.
whole general area, it's difficult to say, but the estimates run between 200 and 500 persons in that whole general scene. There were persons on the overpass. They said the shots came from behind the wooden fence. There were persons in front of the wooden fence. They said the shots came from behind the wooden fence. And there was a railroad yardman. Perhaps Mr. Ball can give us more information about that man if he found him. He was standing back there, and he said that the sound came from behind the fence, and he saw someone throw something into the bushes. He told Mr. Ball that. Maybe Mr. Ball will tell us. Mr. Weitzman told us that the railroad yardman said that. He told that to Mr. Ball. Maybe Mr. Ball can tell us about what the railroad yardman said if he found it.
Have you ever tried to trace the location of a gun from the sound of the shot fired out in the open?
Yes, I was in the Army.
And in a place where there can be reverberations because you've either got buildings around or you're in a depression?
Yes.
Sometimes pretty difficult to tell the direction from which
Oh,
the
there's
shot
no
comes.
question about it that it is more difficult to place specifically a shot from the sound of it than to place something which you actually see. There's no question about that. But in terms of reverberations, I don't know whether or not the Warren Commission conducted an acoustical test. It's difficult to tell from the documents because since there is no index to the documents, they're almost worthless as a reference work. But to my knowledge, and I've been looking at these things for a week and I haven't been able to find any reference to an acoustical test. Whether or not they did, we don't know. But this much we know. Sir, I was answering your question. This much we know, that there are huge buildings. The book depository building looms 7, you can't tell the depth, of course, from the drawing, perhaps because I'm such a poor artist, but the book depository building looms 7 stories high. Then down here on Houston, forming an L, first across the street from the book depository building, directly east is another large building. Then south of it, across the street, is the Dallas Sheriff's Office, which is a very large building. And south of that is another large building. There's a large concentration in an L-shaped form up Elm and around Houston of steel and concrete. Down at the other end where the witnesses, many of the witnesses heard the shots come from, it's a wide open country area. And that little concrete facade is only about 8 feet high, and that wooden fence is only about 5 feet high. So there is no great area there which one would think would force the sounds to reverberate. But the commission could have discovered that by conducting tests. We were frankly a little reluctant to go into Dallas ourselves, our team of investigators, and set off sounds in that area.
Now, you're familiar, are you, with the car in which the president was riding?
Well, no, that was held incommunicado by the United States Secret Service in Washington for 9 days, sent to Dearborn, Michigan, where the interior was destroyed, and as evidence, and the exterior was so completely refinished before the commission could see it. The exterior was refinished and back in commission, and the commission did not have a chance to see it, so I didn't see it. We know this, that reporters for the Dallas Morning News, we know the Washington correspondent of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, correspondents for the New York Times, all asked for permission to examine the limousine when it was impounded by the Secret Service. They were not allowed to do so. Down in Dallas, the AP reporter, Frank Cormier, and Richard Dudman, the Washington correspondent for the Post-Dispatch, saw the car in front of the Parkland Hospital, sought to examine it closely there, but they were pushed back by the Secret Service, and so I know very little about the actual physical characteristics of the limousine, but this is because the government felt it was a top-secret matter, evidently.
Well, I'm afraid that you anticipated more than my question that I'm going to ask you. You have seen pictures of the car in the cavalcade.
I beg your pardon?
You've seen pictures of the car in the cavalcade.
Yes, I have seen those pictures.
This is before all of this that you just described happened.
Yes, before the shots.
Now, the car had no top. The bubble top wasn't on it at the time of the cavalcade trip, was it?
It was not.
There was, however, the customary wraparound windshield in front, was there not?
Yes.
There were also side windscreens, were they not, immediately back of the front seat on each side?
Which were up?
Which were up.
I don't know. It's hard to tell from the pictures.
All right, but the car was equipped with that type of windscreen.
It was equipped with the bubble top, too, which wasn't there, yes.
The bubble top was off. But the side screens were there, were they not?
It was also equipped with a windscreen separating the occupants of the area, the governor and his wife and the president and his wife, from the front of the car. I don't know if that was up. Do you know that? I'd like to know that.
Well, no, I wasn't there.
No, I thought
But
you might know
you talked
because of
with
your
such authority
association
about
with
what
the
happened, didn't happen. I thought you might know. May I make my statement now in narrative form, and then I'll turn Mr. Lane over to anybody else that wants him. Anyone familiar with the workings of the human mind? Anyone familiar with the possibility for errors of perception, understanding, narration, or relation will understand that human testimony, and particularly very frequently eyewitness testimony, can sometimes be fallible. But physical facts sometimes, in fact almost always, physical facts, though silent, speak much more eloquently than sometimes the most garrulous or the most loquacious eyewitness. Now the facts, the physical facts that demonstrate, in my opinion, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the shots that killed the president came from above and behind, not from the side and the front, are these. Now, the facts are not pleasant, ladies and gentlemen, and I shall do my best to keep them from being any grimmer than they have to be. There were two wounds suffered by the president. One in the neck, one in the head. In the back of the neck, let me call it the hole, was shown to be at the autopsy in Bethesda, not in Dallas, not at Parkland, but at Bethesda. The one in the back of the neck was shown to be located about 5.5 inches from the shoulder joint and about 5.5 inches from the right mastoid process. It was a clean and beveled wound to a certain extent, although it is only right to say that the experts would not say definitely that it was a wound of entry, but they said at least it was consistent with it being a wound of entry. Beyond that, however, at the time of the autopsy in Bethesda, the wound in the front of the throat was not there because the Dallas surgeons had made that the starting point for the incision in the tracheotomy that they performed on the president in an effort to save his life. And the doctor in Dallas explained that by saying that because there was a possibility because there was a possibility that there had been some damage to something more than the soft tissues of the throat by that wound, it was necessary to keep the tracheotomy low. And so he used that wound as the starting point. As a result, the wound in the front of the neck, whether it was a wound of entry or a wound of exit, was not available for examination at the time of the autopsy. But it was described by the Dallas surgeons, including those who performed the tracheotomy. And it was clear that that wound was located below the Adam's apple. In other words, the trajectory of the bullet from the back of the neck to the front was in a downward angle. Now, if that were the only wound, perhaps it would not be so conclusive that the shots must have come from above and behind. But the other wound, and it was the fatal one, the other wound took off a substantial part of the parietal bone on the right side. Now, the parietal bone is that part of the skull that is between the frontal bone, which is your forehead, and your occipital bone, which is in back, the posterior side. In other words, it's the temple, that part of the bone that's above the ear. The wound of exit on that wound, the doctors were clear after a part of the removed bone had been found, was a wound of exit. The wound of entry was a small, clean, beveled hole just about the size that would be made by a 6.5 caliber shell or bullet entering at a somewhat downward angle. Now, there is no way, I'm not going to go into the complete details of the autopsy, ladies and gentlemen. It's not very pleasant reading. There is no way that the wound as located, examined, and described by the autopsy surgeons could have been made by a shot entering from the front, not the fatal wound, the one that took off the parietal bone with part of the scalp. Now look at some of the other physical facts. That point very strongly to the proposition that the shots must have come from behind and above. If your assassin is behind that fence with the car approaching him, and he is aiming at someone seated in the back of that car, just think of what is in his way of making the kind of a hit that was made here. He not only has to shoot over the top of the fence, and the spectators, we've got 500 spectators somewhere out there, it's fair to assume that quite a few of them were in the vicinity of that fence. He not only has to shoot over that fence and over their heads, he has to shoot past the windshield on a very short angle, because from the windshield to the windscreen at an angle gives you a very small lateral space through which to shoot. He has to go through there. He has to miss the governor sitting on the jump seat or Mrs. Connolly, and then hit the president. All of that from behind the fence. At least 3 shots were fired, that much we know. We know that at least 2 cartridge shells had to be ejected in order for 3 shots to be fired. No one has denied, so far as I know, that 3 cartridge shells were found on the 6th floor of the Texas Book Depository. But no spent cartridge cases were found by the fence. No bullets were found which on ballistic examination could have come from any gun other than this carbine, and an independent ballistics expert, not connected with the government as I understand it, but an independent one, generally recognized to be one of the best in the country, testified, if I recall correctly, without qualification, that the bullets that he examined, including one of the bullets that was found on the stretcher of Governor Connolly that was taken into the hospital, and pieces of the bullets that were recovered from the car or in the vicinity, could not have come from any other gun but the carbine. No, no one really attacks the credibility or the completeness of the evidence tracing that carbine to Lee Harvey Oswald. Nobody really denies that a gun was found on the 6th floor or in the Texas Book Depository, or that the three spent cartridge cases were there. No one has found any shells or any gun anywhere else.
Ladies and gentlemen, everyone on the panel and Mr. Lane will have a full opportunity to discuss this.
Something about an inquiry.
And if you want to ascertain what the truth is, you can best do so by listening. Now, Mr. Lane has asked, please wait. Mr. Lane has asked for an opportunity to respond to Mr. Ball, to Mr. Sullivan. I told him he can have that. This is not a popularity contest. None of it that happened that the president was assassinated. We're trying to find out the truth. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I don't want to take too much time. My colleagues, too much more time. My colleagues certainly ought to be entitled to say something. If Mr. Lane is going to reply to all of us, well, obviously I've taken the major part of the time that's allotted to our side of this meeting or discussion, shall we call it. So let me close very briefly. It is not enough, in the face of the evidence that has been accumulated about where the shots came from, about what was found at the location of Oswald's activities at the time, about the absence of anything at all suspicious or inculpatory having been found at this other place from which the shots were supposed to have been found. It's not enough in the face of all that simply to say, oh, well, it didn't happen that way. It happened. Somebody shot and killed the president. The shots that killed him came from a 6.5 Italian carbine at some point. That gun was found on the 6th or in the Texas Book Depository. Lee Harvey Oswald was there, and it was his gun. Nothing else in the way of a weapon or of any trace of a weapon that could have produced the result has been found by anyone. There has been no credible evidence or any evidence to that effect. And in the face of that, who is it? Who is it that is indulging in speculation? The Warren Commission that heard, analyzed, and collated the evidence, or Mr. Lane who simply says, "'Tain't so, 'tain't so."
Mr. Lane, you will have 5 minutes if you choose to take to respond to this. Just a second, sir.
Well, I would prefer to respond to what has been said now without the limitation, because at the very outset, as you...
Sorry,
Excuse me, sir.
I am sorry.
May I utilize my 5 minutes as I think best? That's all I'm asking. May I just have my 5 minutes to say whatever I want?
Yes, you can have
Thank you. Thank you. I think that I should have more than 5 minutes, but you're going to limit me to 5. Let me discuss it the way I want. Let me utilize my 5 minutes this way. Because we wanted to have a debate on this question. We asked if any of the persons who want to support the commission report would come here tonight and to debate it, and everyone said no, they would not, but they were willing to cross-examine me. And that's the way it was going to be. I was going to speak, and I was going to be cross-examined. Now I find I'm debating 3 different people at the same time. That's perfectly all right with me. Bring them all on, because the facts will not sustain that position, but I only ask for an opportunity to answer each of the points as they're made. That's all I ask for, no matter how many there are on that side. Now, we understand the price of raising any questions against the establishment is to be told that we are associated with the impeach Earl Warren movement. I say something else, though. I say when we're told to have faith in Earl Warren or anyone else, I answer in the words of Bertrand Russell writing 10 years ago. He said, "We are only asked to have faith about those matters for which there is no evidence. And we are not asked to have faith that 2 and 2 are 4. Nor are we asked to have faith that the world is round. Only in those areas where one wishes to substitute emotion for reason. Let's discuss the facts and forget about faith. Let's have faith in ourselves in an open democratic society to look at the facts and to reach rational conclusions ourselves." Now, the He said these are vital, but he said the photographs and the x-rays, unfortunately, were taken from us before we could see them in an undeveloped state by the FBI, and he wanted the commission to have some pictorial evidence of what happened. He said, I don't know whether or not you'll ever be able to get the photographs and the x-rays from the FBI, and so, gentlemen, I have told an artist, he said, what the situation looked like, and he has drawn 3 pictures, and believe it or not, that's what is in evidence before the commission. Pictures drawn by an artist at the direction of Dr. Humes, the Marine commander, because the commission evidently was not able to get, or at least Dr. Humes felt they would not be able to get these documents. Ballistics experts, I am embarrassed for the bar. Dare anyone get up here and say to anyone that a ballistics report is absolute proof of anything? It is to be interpreted, and when it is interpreted before a court, the prosecution interpreters are there and they say it came from the gun, and the defense experts are there and they say, I examined it, it's true that we agree this line and this line are there, but I say it could very well have come from another gun. Where were the defense before the Warren Commission? There was no defense. I was retained to represent his interests by his mother, and the commission said, no, he's not entitled to counsel. No, he's not entitled to counsel. We re-raised that all over. We raised it with the American Civil Liberties Union. And we raised it widely. And finally the commission reversed itself and they said, yes, he is entitled to counsel, and we're going to appoint counsel, Walter Craig, president of the American Bar Association, who will represent and defend the interests of Oswald before the commission. But what was Mr. Craig saying? I will not represent and I will not defend the interests of that accused assassin. And read the record, see if you can find some place where Mr. Craig was sitting in. See if you can find one question asked by Mr. Craig. He was true to his word. He did not represent and he did not defend the interests. May I finish just a sentence? And then we're all stuck with 5 minutes from now on. Is that correct, sir?
No, sir. I will tell you what the rules are. I need to finish the sentence.
Well, welcome to Beverly Hills. Well, I'll just conclude by saying that any time Mr. Ball, anyone associated with the Warren Commission, or anyone on this platform wants to debate with us in a free and open debate, an exchange where we both have equal time, we can both cross-examine each other, wherever I am, I will go to that place. Hopefully it will be here in Beverly Hills one day and we'll really have a debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, no one who knows me will accuse me of being a member of any establishment. We have another 15 minutes to 11 o'clock when this place has to be vacated. I was given the job of being chairman. I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to try and be as fair as I can. Now, Mr. Lane had 45 minutes. He answers questions, and now we'll ask Mr. Ball to direct an examination. If he has a preliminary observation, he can make it.
Well, yes, I'd like to make an observation. Mr. Lane has referred to something known as the establishment, and I don't know what he's talking about. I'm a country lawyer from Long Beach. I was asked to go back to Washington a year ago this time and take a job as senior counsel for the Warren Commission. I stayed there, gave up my practice and went back there and handled the job as a lawyer would handle it. And let me tell you something. I never received one bit of instruction or order from any member of the commission, including the Chief Justice. I never received an order from Lee Rankin, the counsel. I was given a certain area to investigate and report on, and I did it the same as I do every other lawsuit that I've handled in my practice. Now, I don't know whether Mr. Lane is assaulting my honesty or my integrity when he says that this is a fraud, but it just so happens that the things he's talked to you about tonight were in my field. I had charge of the investigation. I personally examined Dr. Hume at Bethesda, and then Mr. Spector, who worked with me, presented his testimony before the commission. Sidney Wiseman, Mrs. Markham, Howard Brennan, Fraser, and Randall. But this was only a group of many witnesses that I talked to in Dallas and examined before the commission and took their deposition. I took over 100 depositions in Dallas from people. I examined everyone who knew anything, who I found out when I got down there, knew anything about this, because I wanted to find out what were the facts. It didn't make any difference to me whether I discovered that Howard Oswald was the assassin or that someone else was. As I've told many people, it would have been fine if I could have discovered something else, because I'd have probably got my name in Time magazine. Now, the only thing I wish to assure you of is that everything that I discovered in Dallas, I put down on paper, and it's there. And when he talks about these conclusions, I wrote them. I wrote Chapter 4, in which these witnesses are discussed. And when he talks about speculation, I attempted as a lawyer to draw the same inferences from the evidence that I discovered in Dallas that I would from any other lawsuit. Now let me tell you something about this procedure. I was not assisted in the field when I made field investigations, or when I brought witnesses to Washington, or when I brought them into an office and examined them. I was not assisted by any FBI agent. I never talked to an FBI agent about my investigations. In Dallas, I was a Secret Service agent, drove my car, and went out and brought witnesses in for me to talk to. I never talked to a witness in the presence of a Secret Service agent or an FBI agent. I and the group of men that worked with me tried to make this as impartial an investigation as possible. Now, with that forward, I would like to ask Mr. Lane some questions.
Mr. Ball, may I point out that you will,
and Mr. Lane will have 10 minutes for questions and answers if we're going to give Mr. Lane a chance to.
If there's a question and answer, I want the questions answered. I'm going to try to bring out facts. I don't want a speech. If a speech is made, I'll make it myself. Now, Mr. Lane,
I think it'll be fair at this point, with limited time left, and one of the panelists not having been heard from us yet, that the questions be answered without any amplifications.
I'll just nod yes or no.
all right. That is fine with me. There is such a mass of evidence which Mr. Lane has picked out 2 or 3 people, like a Mrs. Markham, who was an utter screwball. And he's picked her out and shown the difficulties with her testimony. And I can assure you that there were 12 people who have identified Oswald in one way or another in connection with the murder of Tippit.
Is that a question, sir? Because
No.
I have a yes or no answer to that. That's not true. There were 2 persons who said they saw the shots fired. Domingo Benavides, who said he could not identify the person, and Mrs. Helen Louise Markham, the only witness produced by the commission who said she actually saw the shots fired, who said she could identify Oswald.
I must ask for more time if Mr. Lane makes a speech. What he has just said is not true. Now, all you have to do is read the record. Now,
give us the name of one witness who saw the shots fired besides Mrs. Markham.
What about Scoggins, the taxi driver?
He said he did not see the shots fired, sir.
He saw, well, anyway, we
You know that.
Mr. Lane makes a technical distinction.
Yes, between
This
a
man
witness...
saw Oswald on the sidewalk. He saw him walk to the car. He heard the shots. He saw Oswald flee toward his car, and he identified him. But that doesn't make any... There were 12 people that identified him. But let's...
Identified him not as shooting, as being a block away, 2 blocks away, a half a block away. Isn't that the 12 people you're talking about?
Let me ask some questions. First, do you Just answer this. Do you believe the evidence is sufficient to prove that Oswald bought this Mannlicher carbine from a mail order house in Chicago?
Klein's store, which advertised it in the February 1963 issue of the American Rifleman. Is that the rest of the question?
This rifle.
Absolutely not. This is the February 1963 issue of the American Rifleman, which the Commission speaks about. This is the only advertisement put in there by Klein's, and the rifle before the Commission is not offered for sale in that issue, and you know that. And you know further that Mr. Klein does not believe that the weapon which Oswald had came from his store, and you know further the Commission refused to call Klein as a witness.
I don't know any such a thing. What he has said is an utter falsehood.
Did the Commission call Klein?
Just a minute now. Let me ask you this.
Did the Commission call Klein, sir?
Let me ask this. Was there not found in the files of the Klein store the order for Oswald for this Mannlicher carbine?
Absolutely not, sir. You know that the only thing Klein's uncovered was an advertisement clipping which had been sent in ordering a different weapon in the first place in the name of A. Hedel, and Klein said that he never heard the name of Oswald. He never sent anything to Oswald. Right. And here is a list of witnesses prepared by your Commission. Appendix 5, page 491. Does the name Klein appear on here as a witness?
Don't confuse the issue. Was Klein's man? I've never heard such a major distortion of what is actually a conclusive fact. Now, was there not found in the Klein files an order for a rifle that was signed A. Hedel, that was identified as the handwriting of Hedel?
No, sir, it was hand printed. It was not handwritten.
Well,
and there are experts who've looked at that and said that is not Lee Harvey Oswald's handwriting.
Name one.
There are scores of them,
one.
but the Commission would not hear them.
Oh,
we have scores of them.
Name one witness the Commission would not hear.
One witness the Commission would not hear?
Yes.
In any area?
Well, they called you.
One witness?
No, Mark Lane was called before the Commission
and gave
us a bunch of newspaper clippings.
That's an outrageous lie, because you know the Commission called Jean Hill, the Dallas public school teacher, wrote her a letter and said, you have talked to Mr. Lane, and Mr. Lane has said you have this testimony, so we are calling you.
Well,
you know that you called back Mrs. Markham because I
Funny.
told you what she said.
I
Now, you
see
know
that
that's true. And you want to know from the...
Mr. Lane, it will result in a cat and dog fight. Let me tell you what the facts are.
Well, that's all right.
Let me tell you what the facts are.
About time there was a dialogue in America on this question.
The facts are this. In the Klein Sporting Goods files was found an order signed by an A. Hedel.
Not signed, sir, handwritten.
Handwritten.
Yes,
Handwritten.
I'll try.
Handwritten. An order. There was also a shipping order to A. Hedel to a certain post office box in Dallas. This handwriting, hand printing on this was identified by several handwriting experts, not FBI experts, because we got different experts, as the hand printing of Oswald. The post office box to which it was shipped by Klein was a post office box that was rented by Oswald in his own name.
Is this a cross-examination?
When Oswald, I can't cross-examine you because you don't tell the truth.
I don't give you the answers you want, that's for sure.
Oswald...
Is this just one long summation, sir? You're here to cross-examine me.
Mr. Lane, please.
Please,
I only
what?
have it.
Mr. Lane, you had a 45-minute opening. You have had questions which you've answered. Mr. Ball has a right to either examine you or make an observation. Now, you will have time, more time than any one of the panelists.
There were three of them.
You were not interrupted, sir, during any of the 45 minutes. And we are not here for one side or the other.
No.
And both sides have to be heard. Now, please let Mr. Ball make his observation or ask your question.
In other words, not only by handwriting, but also by the renting of the box to which this gun was shipped, did they trace the gun to Oswald. Oswald went under the name of A. Hidell. That was his alias. When he was arrested, he had in his pocket a forged certificate of registration with his picture superimposed upon a document, A. Hidell. His wife said that he went under the name of A. Hidell. In New Orleans, he had gone under the name of A. Hidell. Furthermore, after the assassination, there were 3 cartridges found on the 6th floor near the southeast window. And there was this gun that we talk about that was found on the 6th floor. Every expert, ballistic expert, said that this gun fired those cartridges to the exclusion of any other weapon. There was found a bullet, a whole bullet, and there were found 2 partial pieces of bullet. The ballistics experts said that they were fired from this weapon to the exclusion of any other weapon. But Oswald left the Texas School Book Depository and fled to his home. We know that. He got himself a gun. When he was arrested, he had a gun on him. The bullets that were taken from Tippett's body were not mutilated. Some were and some were not, but they were examined by ballistic experts. There were 4 cartridges cases found in the bushes right near the murder of Tippett. The ballistics experts said that these cartridges were found from this gun that was on Oswald when he was arrested to the exclusion of all other evidence.
I'm sorry,
I'll say one thing. There were 3 witnesses who actually saw Tippett murdered, though there was Scoggins had a bush between them is all. There were, as he fled down the way, there was Ted Calloway and Sam Ginyard that saw him, identified him. There were 4 other witnesses. He discarded the coat that he had on, which is identified as his coat, on the way as he fled to the Texas Theater. In other words, all of these facts, I came to the conclusion that I had never seen a case that was so conclusively proven by evidence under oath. We don't take newspaper reports and what the Dallas chief of police says, as Mr. Lane. We didn't take a single bit of evidence into consideration unless it was under oath.
Mr. Chairman,
ladies and gentlemen,
I just leave walk out. I'd like to
I
talk to the chairman,
have
so give me a
children
shot.
rather than they please, and I will be accountable for any change in the format. Now, since, just a second, please. Now, since the dialogue between Joe Ball and Mr. Lane has proven to be abortive, we will now turn to Mr. Wirrett and see whether we can get it between the 2 of them.
You're surely not going to say that I am not permitted to answer the questions that were raised. You're not saying that, are you, sir? Well, I'd like to answer them now that they've been made, if I might.
You can have 5 minutes, Mr. Lane.
Well, that seems adequate. First of all, Mr. Ball takes the position that Mrs. Markham is some kind of a nut. He may be right. What does the commission say? Page 168. Addressing itself solely to the probative value of Mrs. Markham's contemporaneous description of the gunman and her positive identification of Oswald at the police lineup. Remember that? How about the number 2 man? That was the positive identification they're making reference to. The commission considers her testimony reliable. First they do. She's a nut, said Mr. Ball, but she's a reliable nut because she said Oswald did it. Now we're told that a whole bullet was found somewhere. Now is that whole bullet the bullet which crashed through the president's head and shattered into pieces? Is that whole bullet the bullet which went through the governor, smashed his ribs and ended up in his thigh, a fragment of it? Or is that the whole bullet which struck the curb and smashed into smithereens? Or is that an additional bullet if it's a whole bullet? It is an additional bullet, obviously. So 4 shots were fired, and the commission concedes that that weapon is not capable of firing 4 shots in the 6 seconds. Perhaps we'll hear about that later. No amount of rhetoric can change handprinting to handwriting. No amount of rhetoric can say that handprinting is uniquely identifiable. This is the February 1963 issue of Klein's, of the American Rifle with Klein's advertisement in it. The weapon before the commission is not advertised here. So Oswald could not have ordered it from this. The commission should have read the catalog before they so sloppily made that allegation. Or they could have called Mr. Klein down and questioned the way we did. We just called him up and talked to him. He's very friendly, anxious to give testimony, but the commission would not hear him. They'd rather reach the conclusions. They did not want to have their minds cluttered up by the facts. He received, we're told, the weapon at a post office box addressed to A. Hiddell and at a post office box, but the commission is unable to prove that Oswald maintained that box in the name of A. Hiddell. In fact, the facts are that he did not, because the post inspector, Mr. Holmes, said long before he testified during March of 1963, Oswald maintained the post office box solely in his own name, not in the name of A. Hiddell. The weapon was not sent to Oswald, was sent to A. Hiddell. If that weapon reached Oswald, when sent to the name of A. Hiddell, if it reached Oswald through that post office box, a federal employee committed a felony because it is contrary to the federal rules and contrary to the law. Now, is it possible that Oswald printed the name A. Hiddell, sent in this form to Klein's, and the Klein sent him a rifle they did not even have in stock by mistake? It is possible. I'm willing to concede that. It is possible. They may have had an extra one left over from an old shipment or something like that, which they didn't even know about, and they sent the wrong weapon. It is possible. It's far different from the one before the commission. It's 5.5 pounds. The one before the commission is 8 pounds. The one advertised here, the closest one, is 36 inches long. The one before the commission is 40.2 inches long. It's different in several other identifying areas as well. But it is possible they had one of those. Is it possible that it was sent down to Oswald in the name of A. Hiddell, and some employee made a mistake at the post office and Oswald got it? Of course it is possible. Certainly it is possible. Is it possible that both of those things happen? Somewhat unlikely, but certainly, yes, 30 seconds. Somewhat unlikely, but certainly it is possible. But these are questions. Are we not entitled to the answers by bringing down Mr. Klein and having him explain? We are, but the commission did not even delve into the area. And that is what has been called by the New York Times the most massive investigation in the history of the world. The fact is, where there was a difficult area, the commission did not complete the investigation. It abandoned it. And Mr. Ball says he's willing to stand on the questioning which he conducted of Officer Weitzman. Why didn't you ask him who the railroad man was? He's willing to stand on his questioning of Mrs. Markham. Why, after she said, no, I did not see him there, did he say, was there a number 2 man there? If he's willing to stand on that question, I know he teaches procedure at law school at the University of Southern California. I'd like to have a procedural lesson on why those questions are proper.
Don't applaud now. You may want to boo me before I'm through. But in any event, because it is so late in the evening, and because I think it'll be more fruitful, I will not ask Mr. Lane questions, because I think the question and answer method is not conducive to eliciting an intelligent discussion. Bear with me your suffering, please. And I want to make a short statement, and Mr. Lane may then have as much time as I to say anything he wants, and he can have the last word.
Mr. Warren, let me interrupt for a second.
That's all right with the chairman.
I just want to say, as someone who has served as counsel to Mr. Warren, please let him express his views as he has forced the others to express their views.
I want to address myself to Mr. Lane's statement, which he repeated more than once tonight, that the report of the commission is a fraud, and that the commission in its report has indulged in a deception of the American public. I do not agree with that conclusion. I do not agree with that opinion. That is an opinion which Mr. Lane gave, and I disagree with it. Now, I disagree with that opinion for the following reasons, to be quickly stated. although I have tried all my life not to rely upon authority and to arrive at judgments and opinions on my own, I have learned that in many instances I too have had to rely upon the integrity and the good judgment of others. Now, I consider Carey McWilliams and the nation as an individual and a newspaper, respectively, whose judgment I respect. I do not consider Carey McWilliams or the nation a person or a newspaper which would participate in a fraud or which would condone it. Carey McWilliams in the nation expressed a view which has great weight with me. And the nation said, in our view, the commission did its work well. The report is an admirable document, and the Chief Justice, his associates, and the staff merit the praise they have received. Now that carries a lot of weight with me. I have known all of my life a man by the name of I.F. Stone. I'm sure Mr. Lane has known him. Mr. Stone is an observer in Washington and a reporter of the highest integrity. Politically, he is where I am, left of center, as is the nation, and where I will continue to be. And I will differ with my friends, actually, or in quotation marks, who are left of center, when they are as grossly mistaken in their judgment as is Mr. Lane tonight. Now, Mr. Stone, who has defended the rights of the left, of communists and others, to fair treatment and freedom throughout his life, who is no apologist for any rightists, said, I believe the commission has done a first-rate job. Very rarely does Mr. Stone ever commend a governmental agency. Very rarely. As very rarely do I. He said, I believe the commission has done a first-rate job on a level that does our country proud and is so worthy of so tragic an event. He said this, I don't know that I go as far as this, because I don't know, but he said, I regard the case against Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone killer of the president as conclusive. Now, I am reading this to you merely to say to you, this carries a lot of weight with me, because I respect Mr. Stone, and I think Mr. Stone, in making that conclusion, does it in terms of integrity and high honor. Now, let me tell you what someone is reported in the Los Angeles Times to have said. A view that I disagree with. He said the Warren Commission, and as I read this, without being, I certainly have no desire to be personal with Mr. Lane. I respect him. I think he's grossly mistaken, but he thinks probably I'm more grossly mistaken. So we'll pass that. But in any event, let's see if what I am about to read to you, and then I hope you won't think I'm unfair when I tell you who said this. If what I am reading to you, which is attributed to someone else, doesn't sound pretty much like Mr. Lane. The Warren Commission report, according to this quote, on Mr. Kennedy's murder does a remarkable job, in quotation marks, of crime analysis. But when it comes to telling why and who was responsible, then I feel it does not fulfill its function. Indeed, this is a more conservative criticism of the Warren Commission than we heard from Mr. Lane tonight. This is the criticism of Herbert Philbrick, a stool pigeon and a rightist. And that's what the rightists are saying about the Warren Commission. Now, just a minute.
Makes a difference whose toes you step on.
Now, just listen a minute more.
Ladies and gentlemen, please let Mr. Warren finish. Mr. Lane.
Now, I cannot agree with Mr. Lane that the report is a fraud, because there are portions of it which I think are honorable and which I think have done a great service to the welfare of the nation and the rights of all people in the nation. Now let me tell you about 2 or 3 of them, and I shall be brief and I shall be done. Well, I was going to read, but there is no time for reading now. That portion of the report which criticizes the conduct of the Dallas police and the district attorney of Dallas, though not criticizing them as vigorously as I would, is nonetheless an important contribution, for it is the first time that any federal governmental agency has criticized local police in the manner, though not as severe, as the Warren Commission did about the Dallas police and the Dallas district attorney. The statement in the report that the conduct of the Dallas police and the conduct of the district attorney was such as to have deprived Oswald of a fair trial if he were tried is a good statement, is a correct conclusion. And I hope Mr. Lane, when he winds up, will state whether or not he agrees or disagrees that the commission rendered a service when it made this criticism of the authorities in Dallas. Now, finally,
You have 1 minute, Mr. Warren.
I don't need more than that. Now, finally, the commission says that men on the left, neither the Soviet Union nor Cuba, had anything to do with the assassination of President Kennedy. Now, this statement by the commission, a statement in which the entire commission, including Mr. Dulles, joined, this statement, saving all of us here who are left of center from the venom of the rightists, this statement protects the rights of all of us. Now, had this commission been irresponsible, it might have failed to say that which resulted in not even intensification of the Cold War, had the commission not given this clearance, as it were, to many against whom the rightists were pointing the finger, we might have had, following the assassination of President Kennedy, a real unleashing of terror against persons on the left. So from my point of view, the commission, instead of perpetrating a fraud upon the American people, has rendered a service of major importance to the American people, particularly by protecting the rights from hysteria and hostility, the rights of Americans who are, as I say, in the left or in the left of center. So I respectfully disagree with our distinguished guest from New York in his statement as to the import of this report. I think his statement that this report is a fraud perpetrated on American people is utterly irresponsible.
I didn't want the impression left that we hadn't examined thoroughly Klein's, the source of the gun. Mr. Lane said they'd had this out of stock. We traced the shipment of these guns from the wholesaler to Klein's. We had the date of the shipment. A whole case came in. This gun was on their inventory. We took depositions from wardmen of Klein's. We got all of every one of their documents. We showed conclusively that this gun was shipped to this post office box that was rented by Oswald and was shipped in the name of A. Haddell, when everybody admits, Mr. Lane has to admit, that Oswald used that as his alias. That's all I have to say. This is so simple, ladies and gentlemen, and it's almost unbelievable that anybody would draw a contrary conclusion.
Mr. Selvin.
Well, I will be even even briefer, I think, than Mr. Ball. It is easy to say no. It is easy to characterize evidence as being fraudulent or meaningless or mistaken or whatever you want in that regard. But when you get all through, when you get all through the special pleading, when you get all through the advocacy, and I do not say this disrespectfully because I'm an advocate, that's a lawyer's job, when you get all through the advocacy by one who has been retained to make a point, you get down to the fact that the physical facts with respect to the gun, the shells, the nature of the wounds, and all of those circumstances point to only one conclusion, that Lee Harvey Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald alone shot and killed John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
Mr. Lane will now have 6 minutes to close. And then the meeting will be turned over by me to the initial chairman.
He's got an hour. He's had an hour and a half.
I mean no disrespect to Mr. Selvin when I say that because his reputation did not precede him to the east, I did not know him, therefore I cannot pretend great surprise at his remarks associating anyone who dares to question the Warren Commission report with the impeach Earl Warren movement. The same disclaimer cannot be made for Mr. Weirin, who is known to us in New York and known throughout the nation. And I had never thought that the day would come when I would share a platform with Mr. Weirin and hear him read a statement from Herbert Philbrick and say, if Mr. Philbrick said that and Mr. Lane said that, what does that make Mr. Lane? The last time, no, please. Last time such a technique was employed was when the Un-American Activities Committee said the CIO did this and the Soviet Union did this, and they both agreed on the same position. Or before that, long before that, when the old Dies Committee said that the Communist Party said that the Negroes are entitled to equal treatment, and the NAACP says the same thing, so what does that make them? Now, I know that it is only because of the extreme pressure of this establishment, which Mr. Weirin so well emphasized in quoting Carrie McWilliams, or I have stoned that this unusual statement was made by Mr. Weirin. I know he would not make it ordinarily, and I know it does not represent his thinking generally. We have too much respect for Mr. Weirin and for the organizations with which he is associated to believe that it represents his thinking. I know that the day will come in America, as it came in France 12 years after the conviction of Dreyfus, when the whole liberal establishment and the rest of the establishment said guilty, guilty, guilty for 12 years. Dreyfus was not guilty when the government said it. Dreyfus was not guilty when the Minister of Justice said it. Dreyfus was not guilty when the liberals in the Parliament of France said it, any more than he was guilty 12 years later when the French government had the courage and the honor to reverse its position. And Oswald is not guilty now, any more guilty than he will be when the United States government has the courage and the honor to state that it was wrong. And the reasons afforded by Mr. Weirin are sound ones. There might be an unleashing of activity against the right. There might be an unleashing of activity against the left. There would indeed be divisive days in America, very likely, if that killing remained unsolved. It was a terrible shock for every American citizen, all 190 million of us. We weren't on the verge of panic or revolution, but there was great unrest. And how happy we all were when they caught him 15 minutes later, his description was out, and they said the first day he was a lone assassin. What a reflection. Who ever heard any police officer ever say the man committed the crime alone? How do they know the first day he didn't talk to somebody 2 weeks before who gave him the money, who was arranging for him to get the gun, who told him how to do it? Lone assassin, the first day, that was a reflection upon the FBI and the Dallas police, not upon Lee Harvey Oswald, when they used those words, lone assassin, the very first hours after the killing of the president. Yes, those are the reasons. Mr. Weirin states them. There is no reason for anyone to speculate any longer in terms of this evening's performance. Mr. Weirin tells us we must have a man who did it. We must have a man. There'll be an unleashing. I tell you this, I don't believe we must have a man. First of all, I don't know what the politics of the people here are this evening. I don't think it's relevant, quite frankly. I don't think it makes any difference. And I tell you this, nor are my politics relevant, nor Mr. Weirin's politics relevant or anyone else's politics. I tell you, if this man was condemned to death after his death, condemned as the assassin, in order that the country might breathe easier, in order that the country might breathe easier, so that there would be no unleashing of the terror that Mr. Weirin said, then even on a practical basis that will not work. For when justice is denied to one, be those of us here this evening, left, right, or center, justice is denied to each of us, to every one of us. And no matter how difficult those days may be, I heard that when a man is retained to be an advocate, he makes these points. Nobody's retaining me. I closed down my law office. I get paid for speaking engagements, it's true, and every single penny goes to the Citizens Committee so that they can conduct a continuing examination, investigation in Dallas. No one is here as an advocate tonight except for this viewpoint. I advocate, and I say it, and I'm not ashamed of it. I advocate that the American people are entitled to the facts. The Chief Justice said when he was first questioning witnesses, I'm on my last sentence if I might. The Chief Justice said you may never get the facts in your lifetime, and then they issued the Warren Commission report which tended to prove that his estimate was an accurate one. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, in behalf of the committee that sponsored this meeting and its chairman, to whom I will turn this over, I want to thank Mr. Lane, Mr. Weirin, Mr. Selvin, Mr. Ball for their contribution. You have heard divergent, vigorous opinions, and it's your job to try to draw from these expressions such conclusions as you think are reasonable. Mr. Hammer.
Since Mr. Sherwood has thanked the members of the panel and Mr. Lane, I wish to add my thanks and the committee's thanks to his. And I wish to thank you all for coming and hearing this, what we refer to as a wonderful exchange of ideas. Thank you very much.
Hey, Joe, I need a lawyer. I haven't signed it.
All right, let's wander a bit. Are you reading me? How are you? Did you have a young lady here? Do you have a comment about tonight's show?
You're taping it, are
Yes,
you?
we're taping it. Do you have anything to say? Nothing at all?
No.
Not even you. Do you know that
What?
Mr. Ball and that Mr. Selden refused to have the broadcast released?
They refuse to have it's not going to be on KPFK?
Yes, it's a news broadcast. They didn't. We're going to switch it from public affairs to a news broadcast.
This is like a shocking... Is it being recorded?
Did you enjoy yourself?
Yes, it was like a shocking drama.
When is it going to be broadcast?
They refuse.
Tomorrow at the wide open hour. Probably at
what
5,
time?
if we can. Now, we don't know if we can edit it or not.
What time is
5
that?
o'clock
5
tomorrow.
o'clock,
Yes, that's a wide open hour.
Right.
Are you KPFK listening?
Yeah.
Yes, we
Very
are.
good.
Do you have a comment?
Do you have a comment on tonight's proceedings?
It was very shocking and frustrating.
Why was it shocking?
Because it seemed to me that Mark Lane had really studied the issues very carefully and had a lot of points to make that couldn't be refuted, but the people he was speaking to would not address themselves to the points he raised. And it's like beating your head against the wall.
Are you aware of the stature of the men that he was addressing?
I am. That's what makes it all the more frustrating.
Do you have a comment, sir?
Well, I could have many comments. I was very much disappointed in all three of those who questioned Mr. Lane. I think they should really be ashamed of themselves for the shabbiness of their thinking. I think that the committee did a wonderful job but they did not prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt with all their thousands of words. I could speak a lot more about it, but I think that Mr. Lane did a very remarkable piece of work in all the things that he's been doing, and I admire a man like that for his courage and for his integrity and for everything that he said tonight.
Thank you very much, sir. You, sir.
May I just asked Mr. Ball, and I have a great respect for, I had a great respect for his integrity, but in the service of the American public, in view that a president was willing to die, he should at least, as he called it, he won't lower himself, he should at least make every effort, even to lower himself, to do something about specifically answering or investigating or do something about what Mr. Lane had brought up. Although I don't think Mr. Lane should call things fraud, I'm not of that opinion, but I think it's Mr. Ball's public duty
May I say something?
not to worry about lowering himself.
Well, what is
The president was willing to die. I mean, that's what I had asked.
whom are you
Right.
representing?
This is KPFK
Oh,
Radio,
wonderful.
the listener-sponsored station.
Wonderful.
Yes, ma'am.
I think it's about time that someone started questioning something in America. There isn't enough questioning. Right now, everyone takes everything for what it is, whether it's right or wrong, and no one goes any deeper. I admire him tremendously, and he's a very bright, perceptive young man, and I hope others will follow in his footsteps.
Did you read the
Right.
commission report?
No, I have not,
Do you
and
intend to?
I definitely intend to. Definitely.
Thank you very much, Liz.
Thank you.
Sir, do you have a comment?
No, I say we could sell a lot of copies tonight.
We're
We
not
had
selling copies.
I say we could, that we
Oh,
had
yes,
before.
we've got them here.
And a lot
I
of
know what you
popcorn,
mean.
too.
Right. Mr. Lane? He's gone. He took off.
What station are you from?
I don't know. This is radio station KPFK.
KBFK?
KPFK, 90.7 on the dial.
Yes, of course, I listen to it all the time.
Do you have a comment, sir, on tonight's proceedings?
Yes, I do. I think that Mark Lane is one of the bravest men in the United States, and that the fact that he had the courage to carry on this campaign for such a long time at such personal loss. He's been threatened all over the nation. He has lost many of his clients because of this. Many things have happened to Mr. Lane. And the fact that a scared liberal such as A.L. Weirin can compare this man who has gone through so much personal loss to a man who is informed and just sold his life out to the FBI, such as Herbert Philbrick, is truly a shame, and I'm very sad that this day could occur.
Were you shocked when you heard that statement?
I wasn't shocked. I was very sad. I wasn't surprised at all, because Mr. Weirin is afraid of an unleashment of terror against the left. And even though he is so afraid of this, he did not have to stoop to such tactics as to speak of Mr. Lane in this fashion.
Do you think that was his motivation?
I believe this is his motivation, but I honestly believe that he does not believe many of the findings of the Warren report, but is so afraid of what might happen if it is proven that Lee Harvey Oswald was not the assassin. He is so afraid of the terror that might be unleashed that he will do anything to keep this opinion and keep the American people pacified.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, we'll move along. Do you have a comment to make, sir?
Yes, I was very disappointed in the format of the forum. Mark Lane I've heard him speak on a couple of previous occasions, and he's raised some very serious questions, which I would like to see answered. I believe that he has raised questions which cast a great deal of doubt upon the Warren Commission's report, and I tend to feel that perhaps there is not enough evidence to conclusively prove beyond reasonable doubt that Oswald was guilty.
So you concur with Mr. Lane?
I do not know if I concur, but what I'm getting at is this. I would like to see the things that he has brought up dealt with. And I was very disappointed that even in this forum, which was supposed to be an attempt to deal with them, the format was so structured that the kind of discussion that would have answered it, debate or argument, whatever you want to call it, between, for example, Mr. Ball and Mr. Lane, that was cut off, and that was not allowed to occur. that was a situation where Mr. Lane would have brought up a point and Mr. Ball would have answered it, and they would have hassled over it until they had come to they had resolved it one way or another.
Those 2.5
But that
hours
did not
is a
happen.
very short time. for something.
Well, 2.5 hours can be a very long time if the two people involved deal with each point as it's brought up. Unfortunately, this has not happened, and so there is no way of knowing if there's no way of dealing with Mr. Lane's statements.
Come with me. Yes. Go ahead.
There's no way of dealing with Mr. Lane's statements in an attempt to refute them, because all of the people who are supposed to be concurring in the Warren report won't deal with Mr. Lane, and this raises additional doubts about the truth of the Warren report, at least for me. And I'm very disappointed as a young citizen of the government that the government won't deal with this. And this it drives me further along the line of agreeing with Mr. Lane.
Well, it's
but
not
this is an unfortunate reason to have to agree with someone, although there are many other reasons which tend to unify my view.
Fine. Well, thank you very much. Yes, sir.
It was a very educational evening. Warren gave out the whole secret why Warren suppressed. They didn't want no bloodshed.
Thank you very much, sir. Do you have a comment, sir?
I'd just like to say one thing, and that is that as a student, it's a very sad thing for me to see men in such high and respected positions as the Chief Counsel of the Civil Liberties Union resorting to guilt by association tactics.
This shameful specimen tonight.
Thank you very much.
It's a very
sir.
sad thing to occur.
Thank you very much.
I think Mr. Warren should be very much ashamed of himself for his statements tonight. Really? Who are you anyway?
This is radio station KPFK.
No, I mean you yourself.
Oh, I'm Dick Johnson, but that doesn't matter.
I'm an old subscriber.
Wonderful,
We're
sir.
both.
Nice to have you.
How do you
Do
do?
you have any comments on tonight? Do you have any comments?
KPS. Oh,
We don't know if we can broadcast it or not, but
all
we're
I
getting
can
comments.
say is I was amazed at Al Warren. I never thought I would live to see or hear the day.
You know him.
I know him. I have heard him talk on numerous occasions. Mark Lane expressed it very well when he answered him afterwards. I can only say that before Mark Lane gave his answer, I was furious at Al Warren. I'm glad that Lane answered him the way he did.
Thank you very
I
much.
hope Al Warren has had a chance to consider now.
Very good. Get some people ready for coming. Is there...
And he took his huge ride and left on the yard
This is
lawn.
radio station KPFK. Do you have a statement to make about tonight's?
Yes, I think Mr. Lane was brilliant, and I think Mr. Warren is a disappointment. He's on the decline, he's getting elderly, and he's defending his own little establishment. I think he's pathetic. After all these years of good service, he should retire quietly and not make a statement like he made tonight.
And if Mr. Warren, as an attorney, has to heed the admonitions or the advice of other people, no matter how liberal, how left or center they are, then I'm sorry for Mr. Warren. As for Mr. Ball, I never heard of him before, but if I understand that he teaches law or procedures, I'm sorry for his students.
Do you know that they refuse to sign a release for a public affairs broadcast with us? However, this is a news broadcast. And this will be covered. No, but this will be a news broadcast. I mean, you wouldn't be able to reproduce this? One at a time, please.
When will it be broadcast?
We hope to broadcast it tomorrow night at 5 o'clock on a wide open hour. We hope to. If we can, it'll be scheduled very shortly.
Can you do it? Can you do it without a release?
Oh, yes, this is a news. We think we can. We'll check it with our legal department. This is a news broadcast. This is a news release.
Oh, that's interesting.
Excuse me, sir.
Well, to represent her son. He makes the statement himself. He was hired by Mrs. Osanic
Excuse me,
to
gentlemen.
represent her son, Lee.
It's not true. That's not true. She asked him.
This is a conversation in progress now. Go ahead, sir.
She asked him to represent her son in front of the commission.
How did she get him? Remember the little article that he wrote?
So he agreed to do it, and he went up to the commission, and the commission said that he could not represent Lee Oswald in front of the commission. So he backed out because he couldn't, and they appointed, as you heard him say, somebody.
This is not a true statement according to Mark Lane's own statement.
I heard it from Mark.
Mark Lane made a statement on a locally televised show last Saturday.
I saw that
in which
show.
he himself stated, quote, I was hired by Mrs. Oswald to represent
That's true. That's true.
He was also indicated then that he represented Mrs. Oswald. He denied this. He says it is not true. He says, I was asked to represent her son, Lee Harvey Oswald.
And he agreed to do it.
You just state that he is not.
I didn't say that at all. You didn't hear me. I said he agreed to represent Oswald. He agreed, all right?
And he went doing so today.
Now, wait a minute.
Whether he was allowed to make an appearance before the Warren Commission is at that point immaterial. He is still the legal representative of the rights and interests of the Oswalds.
It's absolutely not so. He was asked by her to represent her son in front of the commission. He agreed to do so. He went in front of the commission. They refused to allow him to represent Oswald. That's the end of it.
Right or wrong, he was going to do the best job of defending that he could
but that's
for the
his
guy.
own desire. That's not because he was hired.
No, wait.
Don't confuse the two things. He's doing it on his own. You're right.
It was carried on from there. He was asked to represent the interests of Lee Harvey Oswald to help prove that he was innocent. From that point on, he is still representing
He is not being paid by her at all. She asked him officially to do what I said. He tried to do it.
If you mean he is no longer being paid by her, with this statement I will agree, because he himself indicated she ran out of funds. But that doesn't mean when you no longer can pay the doctor bill that your doctor is no longer your doctor.
If it'll make you feel more comfortable for me to say that he is representing Oswald as far as the public, I sure agree he is. But I think he's representing me, too. I think he's representing all of us. If you want to put it that way, it's all right with me.
Well, this could be a general statement of any lawyer who is seeking justice.
All right, and I agree, and I think any lawyer seeking justice, usually represents me.
In this particular case, I think he is doing two things. One, he is representing, or at least he started out representing the interests of Lee Harvey Oswald as a defense attorney in a criminal action in an attempt to prove that his client was innocent by any means that, by which he might best be able to. And this is the sole function of a defense attorney, not to determine who the guilty culprit is in Bagaman.
Why are we arguing?
Since then, however, it may well be that he has decided that since this has become a cause célèbre, he has certain other motives in addition to proving the innocence or guilt of Lee Harvey Oswald, and in his case it's the innocence of Lee Harvey Oswald. What those motives may be, I'm not about to express an opinion on, because I too will leave this area of speculation to someone else. I've heard that he's been called an opportunist. I've heard that he's expected to write a book and make $1 million, but so too Clarence Darrow charged $50,000 a case to at a time.
All right, we'll move on. What do you have to say, sir? Did you have a?
I don't think that Mark Lane was set out to primarily prove the innocence of Lee Harvey Oswald. Certainly, this was an important aim, but the byproduct of his defense of Oswald is to show that there has been, no matter what the motivation on the part of the Warren Commission in many areas in government, an attempt to cover up, to use his term, defraud. I don't like the term because I don't think their motivations were as vicious as that. I don't feel that Mark Lane's principal contribution is to prove the innocence of Lee Harvey Oswald, but his principal contribution is to show that we need a reevaluation of some of the forces in our government that can be responsible for this kind of conspiracy.
Tell me, sir, what do you think the consequences of this might be, of Mr. Lane's actions, his continuing actions, after the report has been issued?
Consequences for who? For Mr. Lane?
No, for the American people.
There are so many things on this side of the fence against.
Well, I hope that he will continue until the truth is made apparent, and this ultimately can only make the American people strong. The kind of expedition of a particular situation, easing, giving us rest, as Mr. Weirin intimated it was done, is spurious. It's a invalid, dishonest kind of thing, and cannot last, cannot be healthy.
This was supposed to be a cross-examination, though, and it didn't turn out to be a cross-examination. Every time they asked him a similar question, he started to expound on it to such extent that it was difficult to get any back and forth interplay between the two men without it getting heated. Well, this is understandable, but the only one that presented anything really meaningful against the charges that Mr. Lane made was Mr. Ball. I think Mr. Warren only stated what other people had said, not anything that he felt himself. He was quoting other people. He quoted references and sources, and he was very emotional, or not very moving, I'd say, but he didn't really say anything that was important. Another thing that I think that Mr. Warren did?
Yes, he did. He said that it's more important to protect the masses than to protect the single individual, the single citizen. This he said when he said that we who are left of center ought to be glad. Take this away, I get subconscious.
Don't worry.
We who are to the left of center ought to be glad that we weren't purged. He said that
he's making.
That's what
the audience
said.
He was appealing.
No.
He was appealing.
No, but this isn't what's important. What is important
would
is
agree
that
with him.
each person's freedom is terribly important.
If it could be possible,
Or that this is a left-of-center issue, it isn't.
Let me ask you something. If it could be possible that this were a communist conspiracy, or extreme rightist conspiracy, or a racist conspiracy, if it were shown that it were, would it be right to cover it up and to hide the facts?
No,
of course not.
This is a possibility. I think some of the things, the only thing that I think is significant is that Mr. Lane is bringing up strong points. Some are stronger than others and some are rather weak, but they haven't been answered. And these men didn't answer.
Right. That's exactly how we feel.
Now,
We feel that from what Mr. Lane has to say.
I'm ashamed of Warren. I'm just ashamed of him.
I felt.
I have never in all of my life heard anybody take a position like him, standing up for an organization like the ACLU or anything like that, where he said, in effect, let's be thankful that the Warren Commission
didn't say anything that
didn't say
reprisals against me.
That's right.
You know.
Let's be glad that we created no controversy. Isn't that the point? That the Warren Commission took the side of stopping all controversy and all.
Is that
right?
Yes, sir. I think that one of the most frightening things that I have heard is several people saying, "Isn't it exciting that this took place?"
Where did you hear that, sir?
In the
Several
audience.
of the people were talking in the audience, and
What
they
were
said,
they
"Isn't
referring
it
to?
exciting
That such a meeting could take place. That there's
kind of a
open
meeting
debate
could
on
take
something
place
like this.
because
Open
since McCarthy,
discussion.
this sort of thing hasn't happened around here
Yeah.
for a very long time."
Yes.
And I think that
But the
it's
public can be
frightening to
part
think
and
of the
question.
implications of some intelligent people who come down to a meeting like this saying, "Isn't it exciting that this could take place?" You follow what I mean?
Yes.
And I think that the implications are frightening. And I think we ought to go out and have about 15 other of them real quick so that it's not a novelty.
Right.
Yeah.
This might do that. Thank you.
And I think